Okay, folks, we are live. So for those listening at home, welcome to the Dungeon Musings YouTube channel. My name is Kevin Madison, and I'll be your friendly dungeon muser today, this evening, this afternoon, this morning, whenever this finds you, wherever this finds you. Today, it is January 1st, 2024. So it is the first day of the brand new year in 2024. And I mentioned earlier during my an earlier stream just before the holidays that I had intended on recording the year in review on New Year's Day. I had intended to start this about 2 hours, or about 2 hours ago. But unfortunately, hopefully you will see what took me so long to get things going. I am going to briefly make sure that our stream is live and actually going. It is. Great. So, as is my custom every year here on the channel, what I like to do is either as the new year is looming or once it has dawned, I will look back on the year that was 2023, or the year that was the previous year, not always looking forward to 2023. And that's what I intend to do today. I have used a similar kind of visual trick with the last stream I did, where I'm going to have a bunch of things up on the screen. I haven't put chapters into this video, but it is going to be likely a long one, and it is going to be it's going to have those visual cues. So if you want to like scroll through once this thing has posted to as a video rather than a stream, you'll be able to scroll back or scroll through and see what game I'm talking about at different times. This one is a long one. I mentioned because I want to talk in detail about a couple of different aspects of the games that we ran on the channel. Specifically, I will say at the outset, we ran 32 different games on the channel in 2023, and I am not going to talk about all of them in detail because that's just going to be there's not enough time today for me to get through all of those. But instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about first some games that we ran in 2023 that surprised me, that I feel like I took something away from them in terms of what I might do with them in future, or how they either surprised me or reminded me of things that I knew or liked about them. I'm going to talk about my favorite games of the year. I will say that's not the favorite campaigns, because obviously I do not have a favorite campaign. I'm going to talk about the games themselves, specifically just what type of experience that those specific games, what they encourage, what they gave us at the table, and how it worked. I'm going to talk about the games I have on my to-do list for the coming year. And rather than giving a massive list of what I tried to do is restrain myself a bit in terms of what I was going to talk about, what I'm planning for, and in part because of that relates to the charity games that we have planned for the year. So we've got a lot of different games on the schedule already. So if I am going to set I need to get this to the table kind of thing, I wanted to try and keep that under control. And then there is one, I tried to keep it to 5, but there was one that muscled its way on there at the last second, and I will talk about that, and I think that you will likely find that to be an understandable excuse. And then I'm going to talk about some of the customary stuff we have on the channel, that comes up every year. We tend to run a Star Wars session over the summer. We tend to run a war story at some point in our Wednesday Night Below games. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And yeah, and then, I mean, if folks do show up in about the in chat and have any questions, I'll address those as we go along. So let's dive into it. So 2023 was a busy and one thing I will say at the outset too, for those who may be new, one of the things we don't really look at on the channel is like, we're grateful for any subscribers who join and whatnot. The ad revenue goes directly to the players by way of their Christmas presents this year. But it's not like that's not the thing we focus on for measuring our success or whatever else. What we measure is, did we have fun this year, and did the folks who were viewing this game seem to have fun as well? That's really the long and the short of how we would measure things. So I guess one way of also thinking about this the stream is that we're going to be taking a page from Galadriel, and we're going to talk about games that were, games that are, and some games that have yet to come. Have not yet come to pass. Anna Banana says hi to everyone as well. So, I mentioned that we ran 32 games on the channel this year. Those games were Castles and Crusades, Stars Without Number, Savage Worlds, Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. We played in Spelljammer, in Eberron, in a modern pulp setting, and in Greyhawk. We played Pathfinder 2nd edition. That was in the Spires of Paradar and in our Kingmaker campaign. Crimson Blades, Flames of Freedom, Rogue Trader, G.I. Joe, Mage the Ascension 20th Anniversary Edition, Traveler 2nd Edition from Mongoose Publishing, Amazing Adventures, Zweihander, Starfinder 1st Edition, Deathwatch, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th Edition, Soulbound, Alien, Cult, Divinity Lost, Twilight 2000, Forbidden Lands, Acton Cthulhu 2D20, Dark Souls, the 5th edition based game, Marvel Multiverse, GURPS, Jackals, Cities Without Number, Battletech, Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 edition, D20 Modern, Wrath and Glory, and Conan, the role-playing game published by Mongoose Publishing. So that was a lot of games. Of those, we had several ongoing campaigns, one of which it felt longer to me than what we actually ended up playing. So at the time of recording, our Night Below campaign, which has been changed over about mid-year to 5th edition, it has reached 200 sessions now, and that's been played over the course of about 5 years. We have used different game systems. It started off in AD&D 2nd edition, and then we played a brief war story playing Pathfinder 2, and then we played with Castles and Crusades for a while, and then we have gone to Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition now, and I'll talk more about that a little later today. Traveler has 17 sessions. The Guard, our Savage Worlds Supers campaign, has reached 12 issues, which means we have now 2 trades or 1 good-size omnibus. The Kingmaker campaign, playing with Pathfinder 2nd edition, has reached 16 sessions. I'm just going to get a sip of coffee. I'll try and finish it before it gets cold this time. Warhammer Fantasy 4th edition. Our current campaign, Salt, Silver, and Sin, is 7 sessions long, but that does not include 4 sessions of Rough Nights and Hard Days Rough Nights and Hard Days, I think that's what it's called. There was a adventure companion where we played the first adventure out of that, Rough Night at the Three Feathers, which was a lot of fun. So much so that it prompted us to actually kind of go back to scratch and start a campaign over from the beginning. Rogue Trader has hit 19 sessions. Our Spires of Paradar campaign has hit 48, which means we're inching up towards that big 5-0. G.I. Joe. It was only 3 sessions, but genuinely, I don't know if it occupied more space than what I was thinking of when I was planning of them, but G.I. Joe was only 3 sessions, but 4 if you include the character generation, but it felt like it was a longer campaign. And then we played at the beginning of the year Flames of Freedom, the Zweihander-based game set in kind of a colonial Gothic America in the 18th century? No, 17th century? I think 17th century. And that was 6 sessions we had out of that. That was also a lot of fun. So with those games, I will say, too, I didn't do this in previous years, but I really should have. And I had the opportunity to play with 16 different really terrific, phenomenal players. Everyone who we play with on the channel is a game master as well, or a dungeon master as well. So there's just a really fun and collaborative feel for the gameplay in the channel, which if we did not have players on the channel, we would have no channel. It would be me yapping about what I plan to do, with different games. So I just want to call out a thank you on New Year's Day to Graham, James, Jeffrey, Carl, Andrew, Jamie, Darren, Robert, George, John, David, Dave, Ingolf, Sean, Colin, and Will. Thank you, everybody, for playing with me this year. I've had so much fun with these games, and so much fun playing with all of you. So I really appreciate that you set the time aside to join me in our various games. And I'm looking forward to many more games with all of you in the coming year. One thing that you know, I haven't talked about before, I guess, is just like one of the nice things with running the channel. People sometimes ask, you know, if you're not running the channel for money, you know, or trying to, you know, get subscribers or sponsors or what are you running the channel for? And honestly, it's the best reason that you, I think, play games, which is just to have fun with friends. And that includes many of the viewers who we have seen over the years we have been streaming things on the channel, the people we interact with on the Dungeon Musing Discord. One of the things I include in my outro is that it's a wonderful community that has built up in the Dungeon Musings Discord, and you're more than welcome to join us there. It's a genuine invite to a genuinely great group of people. The hobby attracts a massive variety of different types of folks, and it's just nice having folks who are not even necessarily the same mindset, but just have the same sensibilities, but people have the same mindset as far as, like, you know, different people like different things. So a game that works for somebody may not work for someone else. And yeah, I just and who people who just want to get games to the table as well. You know, it's a really great thing, and that is a big part of this past year in my day job. It has been probably the busiest I've ever been in my career, and I think I've mentioned this on the channel before, but I had changed firms late last year into a new position, and then with it came a lot more responsibilities and a lot more busy files than what I'd had before. And I don't know what this year may see work intrude on this channel schedule. We've already had it happen once so far. I'm trying my best not to. That's one of the reasons why I work in the type of law that I do, is so that I can kind of have some control over when I'm busy and when I'm not. But the reliability of having a table I can come to run games on a regular basis, or to run pickup games or whatever, has been an enormous source of stability and relaxation. One of our players mentioned on stream, I can't remember if it was on stream or if it was beforehand, in our Night Below game, that he was tracking his heart rate over the past year, because, you know, a lot of us are advancing age. And one thing he noticed was that his heart rate or his blood pressure always went down on Wednesdays. And that happened to be the night we were playing Night Below. And that is, I don't have any biometric data to confirm that, but I know that I always feel better after a session. I know that I may not feel that I did as perfect a job as I could have with a session, especially with one-shots or things like that, but I always feel better having hung out and played something, you know, with other folks. So and a lot of that goes to interacting with viewers too. I'm behind on my responding to comments over the holiday season, but thank you very, very much to all the viewers who have commented over the holiday season as well too. I did receive those. I've passed any kind words along to the players, even though I have not yet responded to all of them. So thank you very, very much for that. Know that when any kind words come in for any of the players in any of the games, regardless of how old the game is, I always try to pass those along to the players so that they know that there's other folks who enjoyed what they did with their character, or how they played their, you know, approach a problem or whatever. I am blessed with getting to play with a lot of really terrific role players, so it makes for really, really engaging stories for me to run. So anyway, enough of that stuff. Let's also talk about our charity fundraising. We're still looking back right now in this section. So rather than doing kind of random hodgepodge games this past year, what I tried to do was to try and give structure to the entire year, so that donors in each half of the year to the Heroes Save Villages campaign could try and help shape an overall story. It's an idea I had kind of, you know, I'm sure many dungeon masters have had that idea as well, of running a campaign set across time. You know, a very popular one, which I understand was adapted into a video game too, is the Vampire the Masquerade and Vampire Dark Ages games. Those being set in two different timelines with very old characters. It was easy in fiction to be able to tell a story that took place in two different time periods. Obviously, if you're running a time travel game like, you know, Doctor Who or something like that, that also affords you that opportunity. But what I tried to do is take a page out of a comic series called Multiversal by Grant Morrison. Multiversity? might be called Multiversity. It ain't even what it is a series of, there's one kind of overarching comic that bookends the series beginning and end, but then otherwise it's just individual issues of different series set in different worlds with different sensibilities, with connections that go through all of them. So you'd see, like, there was one story set in kind of a fame-obsessed, near future with superheroes, and one that was a classic kind of C.C. Beck, Shazam, setting, and one that was a kind of a riff on Watchmen, but from a more a more like supernatural or, transcendental kind of approach to it. And each of those sort of all tied together, there was an overarching kind of thread running through them. And that's sort of the approach I took for this, was the idea that we'd have 6 different sessions. I did not know when they were going to be set. I didn't know what game we were going to use. I just knew that I wanted to try and write towards a conclusion that would give structure to the whole thing. And I had a rough idea of kind of what I wanted to do, but honestly, about halfway through, I thought, oh shit, like I've lost the thread here. I don't know if I'm going to be able to bring this in. I'd like to think that I did. I don't. We'll leave it to viewers to decide whether it was a successful experiment. But what we used was 6 games, Amazing Adventures. I put together a set of custom rules for playing Zweihander in the Roman era, like the first century of the Roman Empire. We used Savage Worlds to tell a kung fu story set in the Boxer Rebellion. We used Acton Cthulhu to tell a story set in the 70s in Berlin. We used GURPS to play Vikings, and then we used D20 Modern to play kind of a modern day mystic kind of thing. And not all of the games necessarily facilitated the type of story that we were playing, but it seems like everyone had a good time playing. Like, one of the things I sometimes get caught up in, especially when you're, because you're making the pre-gens, you get in your head all the different abilities and all the different things that you want to see, like, oh, they can do this and they can do that, and this is going to be so cool at the table. Not realizing that, like, for one, unless you're setting up a set of encounters or whatnot that will specifically let them do that, you don't need to see everything at the table. So just because a pre-gen has it on there, it doesn't mean that they need to see it at the table. The story, so long as it holds together, and the gameplay, as long as they were able to engage the players were able to engage some part of of what makes their character unique over the course of the session. I don't know if it is necessary to, have seen every single thing the characters are capable of at the table. And that may not be a surprise to other GMs, but it's one of those things I realized when I finished a couple of them, and I felt like, I didn't have enough time to get through all the stuff I wanted. And I did story-wise, I just didn't get a chance to get the players to do every one of their abilities, So in that way, I mean that the games, I don't think none of the games we selected were a disservice to the game. It's just that, given the length of the session, given the fact that each of them was done in one, we didn't necessarily get a chance to see everything that the characters were capable of that you would see over the course of an ongoing campaign, but that was never the point of those games anyway, so I was judging them inappropriately for it. So, of those, yeah, I will say, like, it was definitely a high concept game. And it was a lot of work because each of those required a fair amount of independent research to try and figure out what I was going to do with the settings and what options we were going to present to the players. It was really interesting having other people decide when things would be and what they would be, what game we'd be using for it and what kind of players we would have. I did have my thumb on the scale in the sense that I was shaping the options that were available, but I really tried to be sure that there were always more than, like, there was a variety of different options. It wasn't just, 4 permutations of effectively the same thing, and it was, as a game master, it's one of the most gratifying mini campaigns I've ever run. It was a very high concept idea. It was a lot of adjustment to others' expectations, and it was a lot of work putting together a game session that would be worthwhile. But, like, that's all the fun stuff in my mind. Like, not all the fun stuff, but that's a lot of the fun stuff. I love putting together the pre-gens. I love putting together figuring out what the story is going to be for each thing. You're going to get to it at some point. It's just, sometimes it's a matter of hammering up against that research or hammering up against those books to figure out, okay, what are we actually doing with this? And it was really, I really enjoyed it. It makes me think that I wouldn't necessarily do it again, at least not anytime soon, partly because I've already just done that. But I will say that if you do have a really high concept idea for a short series of sessions, and you have players who are willing to indulge, that kind of experiment, I'd really encourage you to give it a try, because it was such an interesting exercise. Not only putting all of that stuff together over the course of the year, but seeing what the players did with what I put together once it was together. There were elements of things that happened in game that gave me things to draw on for later in the story that I could reference back to, and that's great stuff. So it's all the different skills that you kind of bring to the table as a game master in terms of like planning, both like before you get the game to the table the first time, managing the play at the table, and then throughout the session listening to what players are doing or saying so that you can steal those ideas and steal those elements and reference them back. It was a great exercise. Again, a lot of work. So, it does require more work than what your average campaign does, but I think that what I've learned from going through that and some of the ideas, it's also a white whale of mine that I've now landed. So that really makes me happy. And again, a huge thank you to everyone who donated to the Heroes Save Villages campaign and made that one possible this year. It was just a ton of fun. This year we're doing something different. I have yet to formalize how we're going to engage the donors and give them something that, as a thank you for this. But we have a number of other games that are coming as charity games this year. But I'll talk about those when we get to talking about this year, 2024. So that's what, that's where we kind of started off overall. 2023, I will say, was one of the, just broadly speaking, one of the really satisfying things with it is the number of ongoing games we've managed to maintain. So there are some games that kicked off in 2023 or kicked off just shortly before 2023. Many of those are with players who it's their second year as part of the player roster, so we're getting to see them play more regularly, which is always great. And we're seeing, as is always, or has been the case for a couple of years now, we're seeing players put together their own games with each other as well, which I just fucking love. Like, who would not want to play with these people? So I understand that completely. It was really, I really enjoy writing one-shots, but I think that in my heart, I am a dungeon master who likes, the ongoing story. I like the slow burn. I really enjoy taking my time with sessions. And one of the things we've done with some of our one-shots lately is, rather than, with the exception of the charity sessions, I've said to players at the outset, look, I'm not going to run this like a one-shot, just try and get it done. I want us to just enjoy the game, to see what it's like, drink in the atmosphere, see what the gameplay would be like. And that has led to a couple revelations that I'm going to talk about momentarily. So that was the year that was 32 games we played over the course of the year. A number of campaigns that are now at least two of them have now reached the age to drive in some states or provinces, and one is well past its natural life. I will say, with the Night Below campaign, the thing that is, I mentioned this in the other stream I did about 13 campaigns that never came to pass, or whatever I called that video, and it has really taught me an awful lot about all different aspects of running a long-term campaign. We're going to do another year, like kind of annual check-in with the players on that one. So we're going to talk to everybody about, you know, what me reaching 200 meant to them. So I'll save my comments in relation to that when that comes. We're also planning on doing a stream with the players from the Hero Save Villages, from the Year of Ill Omens campaign, so you can hear from their perspective what, you know, what they thought the campaign was like. And what else do we have? Paradar is about to wrap up its story, its current mystery, and then we're probably going to do another year check-in with that as well. Yeah, it's been a really great year. I'm really satisfied with the number of games. As is always the case, I kind of forgot how many different games we managed to get to the table this year. It always gives me hope for the coming year, for how many games we might get to the table in the coming year. Our games, just looking at the ones that have a lot of legs behind them, run the gamut from, you know, large publishers to mid-scale publishers to small publishers. So I'm happy with that as well, because I like some games are old, some games are new. Yeah. So let's talk about some of the games. So first, the next things I want to talk about are the games that either surprised me or that what was the other word I was using? They either surprised or caused me to reassess what I thought about the game over the course of some sessions. So that's the first one we're going to talk about, and then we'll talk about my favorites from 2023. My God, I'm getting ahead of myself. Those games from 2025, I'm sure, are going to be awesome as well. But let's dive into our games. So let me get this active. There we go. And first ones, these are ones that either surprised me or reminded me of what I liked about them or whatever. First up is GURPS. So GURPS is the generic universal role-playing system published by Steve Jackson Games, currently in its 4th edition, although I hear rumbles online that it might be going for a 5th edition at some point soon. Maybe. 4th edition is the edition that I have primarily played. I owned 3rd edition back in the day, and I owned a ton of books for it, but I never really ran it. I read the shit out of it. I made a bunch of characters for it, but I never really got it to the table, in part because 3rd edition had just god-awful binding, so the pages fell out, and it just drives me nuts when that happens. I can't run games when they're all a bunch of loose pages. I hate reading the books. These have always been this nice hardback format, and there are a couple of, I mean, depending on who you ask, I think they're relatively minor, but there are some changes to how like core stats function in GURPS from 3rd to 4th, but for the most part, you can use almost everything from 3rd edition for this. I only got GURPS to the table with one session this year, which was for GURPS Vikings, but I did a fair amount of work on a GURPS Conan game as well over the course of the year. GURPS is just the thing that was really great. I talk about GURPS quite a bit in terms of what I remember about it, and because time just is fucking slipping away, I forget that it's been, 20 years since I really ran a GURPS ongoing campaign. And not only does that mean I've forgotten some stuff, I've learned and been exposed to learn more about and been exposed to more role-playing games in that time, and I've learned more things about myself as a dungeon master and how to approach running games and whatnot. So there are things that I got some things that I forgot about it, and I likewise have changed as a game master. So going back to it was really cool. The game definitely is it is complex, soup to nuts. It is just not a streamlined game. The core mechanic is incredibly simple. 3d6 roll under. The implementation of that, for the most part, is really easy to understand too. And it has something I love where it gives you more information about your roll than just success or failure. I think it's called margin of success in the game, although I get that wrong often when I talk about other games. But there is basically the difference between what you rolled and what you needed to roll. And the reason I love that mechanic so much is because it gives you more information as a game master, so you can kind of interpret what's gone on, but also there are certain sub-mechanics that you can then engage that make use of that number. So it makes characters who are exceptionally skilled that much more likely to proceed quickly through something. More often than not, it's a matter of like, you need, say, 10 margins of success in order to succeed at a task, and there's a time tick, and so every iteration of your dice rolls ends up being a set length of time. That's great. I love that stuff because it gives meaning to the different things, and it also means that when characters want to try and like hamper their adversaries, the way that GURPS handles contesting tasks is extremely elegant, and it does a really great job of handling extreme competence across different lines. So if you've got skills at a very high level on one side, and high level on the other side, on a 3D, like say you got a 22 and a 25, right? Like you're not waiting for someone to roll a fail. The game gives you the math of how to scale those down to be meaningful in stakes, and then players can sometimes take modifiers to try and affect their adversaries' chances of succeeding. I still love the damage mechanics in the game. It simulates reality, I think, in a way that I just find extremely evocative. It's weird maybe to think of a simulationist game giving that kind of immersion in the fiction, but I just love how the game tries to model what happens when folks are injured. There's less of that abstract of, okay, so how do I less like sort of fuzziness of like just, okay, you take some hit point damage, but I'm not going to narrate yet another parry because you've got a big bucket of hit points. This one, every cut, every scrape, every bruise or busted rib, it matters, and I really, really loved the game, and I think that it is something that. Another thing I remember is how robust the game is, in the sense that it has very easily adapted rules, or either that are rules for something. Like if I want to, make someone make a sight check or use one of their senses, they can taste something funny about the food. I've got clear rules for how to do that in the game, and the characters more often than not are fairly competent too. So we're not dealing with a bunch of chumps. Our one session of it was in the Vikings setting, and it left me really wanting to see what an ongoing campaign might be with a slow trickle of regular character points going on. Not necessarily in the Vikings campaign, although the players just played the hell out of those characters, and it was really fucking cool. But I mean, we have a session coming up next year where I will be running a hard sci-fi horror GURPS game, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But GURPS is just... I think that it is a lot of work. It is a lot of work for the players. In particular, if you do not have access to a character builder program, which is not free, then it's a chore to or can be a chore, unless you really love sitting with sheets and crunching numbers. And I used to do that back in the day before I had the character builder. Anyway, so like for myself, I didn't mind that, but. And also, one revelation I had about GURPS, which has always been there, is that you do not need to build adversaries and everyone else the same way you build players. All you need for them is the stats. And there are products that have come out since the basic set came out in whatever it was, 2001? Let's see here. Originally came out in 2000... either 2002 or 2004, and those include the Dungeon Fantasy books and a series of books published by I can't forget Doug. He's the author of Dungeon Grappling. He has a series of books that are in a Viking setting for Dungeon Fantasy, which is a GURPS based version of kind of D&D. And those have, in particular, just if you're playing a fantasy game, have a ton of monsters in them that are very easily skinned. Not only monsters, but NPCs as well. So Yeah, GURPS, that was a really nice surprise. You know, it's a game that I talk quite a bit about in, you know, when I used to do a podcast, and on the channel I've mentioned on and off as being kind of a go-to thing. What a great game, you know. Definitely not the game to run every game or to run every campaign, and definitely not for every table, and definitely not for every player or game master, but I remember why I love it now, and that was a really nice reminder to get that back to the table for a proper session, you know, playing in a type of setting, a Viking, you know, dark fantasy thing. Sign me up. Like, that's exactly, as someone younger and cooler might say, is my jam. So that was GURPS. Another one, we only got this to the table once, but that was Marvel Multiverse role-playing game. It was Will and I who got to play this once, and it was with a version of the Roll20 character sheet that is not the current version. It was less functional at the time, which I found to be very frustrating. For those who aren't familiar with the game, this is the most recent version of a Marvel game. It was published by Marvel itself, so it's the second of the games to be published directly by Marvel, and it was written by Matt Forbeck, a name that probably a lot of folks who are, you know, of the older gaming vintage will recognize. He has been extremely prolific over the years, but some of my favorite work of his includes some of the stuff for D&D 3 and 3.5, some of his work on the Deadlands series of games, because he worked for, I don't know if he was a staffer or if he was a contractor, but or freelance writer, but he wrote a lot of stuff for Pinnacle back in the day for their various Deadlands games, and he released a dark superhero game called Brave New World, which was really fucking cool. It kind of riffed on the idea of the Savage World system. So he has an extensive pedigree with superhero products and with gaming stuff. The game was also playtested quite extensively, and it really changed over the course of the game. And I've only participated in 2 different playtests for games so far. Well, 3 if you count 5th edition, but I don't really. The public playtesting, the component of these big games, I think is such a good. The degree to which the games change from the initial playtest to what comes out is such a great testament to the value of doing that, of really like swinging for the fences with your initial design, but being willing to change over time. So I mention that only because if you saw what was in the playtest, that is not what is in the final version. In the final version, it is like in the earlier versions of the game, a 3d6 based game, but you use one 6-sided dice that is a different color, because that is your 616 dice, or the Marvel dice. 616, I'm sure that most folks who'll be listening to this channel would know, is the designation for the Marvel mainline Earth in the Marvel Universe. And I think it's also the designation they have afterwards given the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I saw there was a reference to 616 in an episode of Loki, but I didn't bother to follow up with that. So that's why you're playing with 616, though, is because that. And then I believe the reference to 616 was because it was the street address of Marvel in New York, when it was located in New York at the time, like in the 70s or 60s, 70s, 80s, or whenever it was that they were in those buildings. So that is the reason why it's 616 and why the dice are 616. But what it means is it weighs things in favor of the players succeeding, because the Marvel dice counts as both a 6 and the 1 counts as a 6. What you also have is these dice mechanics called edges or trouble. And edge means you get to pick up a dice and re-roll it and take the higher of the 2. The trouble means the Game Master picks up 1 and rolls it again. There's a proprietary name, I think, for the Game Master in this, but I don't remember what it is. The game is... Oh, Anna says hi. Again, the game itself is, I would say, definitely on the more complex side on the face of things as far as superhero games are concerned. It requires a bit more player side knowledge for the different powers, because it's not just a matter of like super strength or like flight or, manipulating fire, each power has its own kind of specific thing. It's a very, like, almost like feat based, whereas a very niche kind of implementation of that. But the thing is that I don't know. When I first read it, I was like, oh, this is a lot of complexity. It's a lot of shit to keep for the game master to keep track of if you're running a bunch of supervillains. But having spent more time with the game, and also with Roll20 having changed the sheet now, the biggest pain in the ass with the Roll20 sheets before was that you couldn't re-roll your stuff easily. So we would have to be constantly plugging in numbers, and like when a core part of your gameplay is rolling dice over again, a re-roll button is kind of a necessary thing for a sheet, particularly one put out by a publisher. Savage Worlds has a great sheet like that. Genesis has a great does Genesis? I don't know if it's got a re-roll feature, because that's not really a thing in that game. But this does. I know that the Forbidden Lands one has a re-roll function in it that's really handy. But they put it in. So now you have full display of all the different abilities your character has. You can also read on the character sheets what each of the different powers does, and you can put it in chat. So that's really handy. And the more I thought about it, so this is a non sequitur, but so one of the things that I run a lot of role-playing games. I like video games as well, but I just don't get a chance to play them quite a bit, nearly as much as what I do. And when I do play them, more often than not, I go to these games that are PvP and low complexity, so I can get in, get out. Part of that is for time, but also part of it is because there is a certain level of regular complexity that comes with any kind of long-term role-playing game. The Witcher 3, Cyberpunk 2077, Remnant 2, any of the Assassin's Creed games. These are all partly done games that I have where when I go back to them, I'm like, I don't remember how any of this shit works again, because the game is so complex, whether it's, crafting or spells or fighting mechanics or whatever. So I inevitably have to go back to the beginning and start playing over again. The thing is, those are exceedingly popular games. Remnant 2 being maybe the outlier there, but most of them are quite popular games. So the baseline complexity for a lot of other gaming media that folks will be coming to in this game is going to be, is going to have a higher level of complexity with like crafting and talents and talent trees and whatever else. League of Legends and World of Warcraft both have very complex kind of character building stuff. I know they're different types of games, but those are two popular fantasy games that I think might have bleed over into RPGs. So I don't know if the complexity in this is so bad. It requires some there's two things I think I would assist with this. One of them is just sticking with it, because once you learn these, or once you make notes or cheat sheets, you could have an index card that has all the kind of rough explanations of what your different powers do. Not only what they do, but also what they cost, because certain things will cost some of one of your resources, your focus, in order to make use of them. But the other thing they could do is, it would be so great if they released a series of power cards with the game, so that you could actually have those set out like spell cards, released for a bunch of other games, just so you've got an easy access to it and you can have it sitting in front of you, so you know the difference between your various, Moon Knight has like 3 different range attacks, and so you know what each of them actually does. I think like for sitting down and just rolling dice and whatnot, I think that this doesn't, as far as like picking up and immediately playing with very little prep, I think that this does not replace the Phase Rip, the Marvel Superheroes game, but I think it's going for something different. I think that this is going for more engaging long-term play. I think that because the first book they released is like a 6-part mega adventure. This also introduced a bunch of new characters, and then early in the new year we're getting the X-Men book as well, which is apparently going to have some new powers as well as a bunch of new characters. I think now that the Roll20 has incorporated that stuff, I think this would be a lot of fun to run. I think there still is the issue of complexity, but that is not an insurmountable one. I sat down after Cataclysm of Kang came out, I sat down and read through, and they happened to include a couple of my favorite Marvel characters in it. So I was like, let's look through, and rereading it a second time, it's not that bad. It's like any game with moderate complexity. With time that's spent with it, you would be able to figure out what they do. And I think you could have some really extraordinary... There's also, in the Cataclysm of Kang, they expand out different ways of using skills in the adventure. So that has definitely got me thinking that I think I need to give this one another try with some better preparation, with some better handouts, and with players who have time to study their characters they're going to play, as it were, to do at least whatever prep they feel is necessary to be able to take full advantage of their stuff. I think once all that is done, the game would run like a dream. The other thing is that there is one of the thing the games makes use of is fluctuating multipliers. So you have a certain level that there's different tiers in the game, 1 to 6, and then generally speaking, those serve as multipliers for what damage you do or the level of effect you have with your different things. And then there are things like resistance or armor or mind psi shields and things like that will reduce, rather than just giving a flat reduction to damage, it decreases the multiplier. And that, when we first played it, was very hard to read on the character sheet. They have fixed that in Roll20, so it is extremely easy. You still can't make the adjustments on the fly, but it is much easier to figure out, this is what we need to do. We need to scale this down, scale this up. So it is not it is not as young of a game, let's say, as what Phase Rip Marvel Superheroes was, where I think I started playing at 10 or something. I, as a 10-year-old, I'm not sure I would be able to fully appreciate this game. But for teens or young adults who are, into Dungeons and Dragons or whatnot, and are looking to have a similar level of, not sophistication, but a similar level of crunch to their game, this is going to be probably closer to what they're looking for. It's also exceedingly easy to rework characters. If you feel that a character in the book is presented as too powerful, not powerful enough, or whatnot, it is extraordinarily easy to scale them up, scale them down. If you think that you want to present either a multiversal version or of a character at a different point in their history, you can likewise do that, swapping out powers. Super easy as well. It's a very light on its feet in many ways game, and there's also character generation. Some really interesting ways of building your own heroes. So if you are someone who wants to build their own heroes in it, I would not say that this would take the place of a dedicated Supers game per se, but if you want to play in the Marvel universe, but you want to make your own characters, you absolutely can do that with this game too. So that's what gave me a rethink of that. Next up is probably not a surprise because we did it, but Forbidden Lands. So we ran in the latter half of the year several Year Zero games, including Alien and Twilight 2000 and Forbidden Lands. Previously, I had only run Vaesen. And Vaesen I really loved on paper. I really loved the reading of it. I could not quite wrap my head around how they intended the mysteries to sort of roll out. So that was a bit of a challenge for me. But this one is their fantasy version, and it was intended to be take some of the sandboxing and base building stuff from their Mutant Year Zero games and adapt it to kind of an old school sandbox. And I have heard nothing but amazing things about this game from everybody who has run it. And no, that's not true. With the exception of there is some folks found that they were getting their asses kicked a little too easily for it. So, I think going in with the expectation of what the play experience is going to be like and what kinds of heroes, you don't go into Forbidden Lands expecting to be playing Pathfinder 2 heroes, right? Like, you're going in characters who have a lot less guardrails, as it were, to keep them alive. That's not to say you can't get quite powerful. A friend of mine told me about his campaign that went quite long, and they were very, very powerful, but you're always mortal, though, in the game. The things that really appealed to me about the game, and the reason it's on this list, is it was it makes survival mechanics so fun. You know, like I regular viewers of the channel will know that I love incorporating survival components to the various games that we run, and we've tried a whole bunch of different things, some more successful than others, but this one is a very abstracted approach to it, but it's so cool because like everybody seems to have something they can be doing during the time, the way they break up the day. Like, it is a survival game that also happens to be a fantasy game. That's really, I think, the way to think of Forbidden Lands properly. Everything is regimented into the 4 different parts of the day, and you have to be thinking on a day-per-day basis on how you're doing that. And that is absolutely... I was just checking in on the Matt Colville role-playing game, because his RPG is coming out, and it seems to be trying to hit that same vein as like as 4th edition D&D did, where it is tactical and it is fun at the table, and it focuses on heroic combat and whatnot. Dungeon crawling, that's not the game that's going to be. Survival mechanics, that's not the game that's going to be. That's what Forbidden Lands is. You know, Forbidden Lands offers you an emergent play, and I happen to run our game in the Bitter Reach, which is like their airsats, kind of like Northrend or, you know, Lich King kind of setting, and that is my favorite. It's a Warcraft reference for those who may be not Warcraft players, but the World of Warcraft that's my favorite expansion from that thing. I love the Norse aesthetics. I love the, you know, cold. You might be Canadian in me that really enjoys that stuff, but I really like that. And this game, it was fascinating how well it did that and how much fun it was for the players. Like, everyone had, when someone was able to, you know, fashion a pot out of an old helmet or out of an old pan, or just to be able to boil water for everyone, that was a huge success for everybody, because they were washed up on the shore and whatever. And like, that's just it's a really neat game. I will say that we were trying to run it on like a bi-monthly basis as a rotating group, and that for this game is challenging, because in other games, when you were running on a more rotating table and on an infrequent basis, there is, generally speaking, a through line of story that you can kind of, if you're running a traditional kind of role-playing game. So every session, you can start with a recap, players, and we're all, you know, with all the different kinds of media that we engage with, you're already primed to understand, like, oh, it's a story, and this is how, you know, where we are in this story, and then we're going to go on. But because Forbidden Lands is both an emergent play style of game, and one that is focused on survival, and that does its storytelling in an environmental manner, where you encounter things and you are left to extrapolate from them what it means in the larger setting. It rewards regular play, and it's the kind of thing that I absolutely love. You know, if players encounter stuff and then 2 years down the road they get context for something, they're like, oh fuck, that's cool. That, in my mind, is more rewarding for the player than just necessarily feeding it to them. But it requires that constant attention to the minutia and to following through. Otherwise, all you're really playing is someone trying to figure out, like, so what's our summary of our, you know, where we were last time? Well, we have X amount of food, Y amount of water, and we're, you know, Z away from the hexes away from the town. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that it's, I think that you're taking what's a fun, light, and easily engaged with survival mechanic that augments the role playing and augments the story that's going on, and you're kind of letting the story fall away just because of the folks have other games they play, time passes, they have other things going on in their life. They're not going to necessarily remember every particular thing that happened in the last session. So I don't know. We had difficulty getting our regular sessions in that. I think we might have only played 2. They were really good, mind, but I don't feel there was a strong through point as far as the story was with that. And I think that would be remedied by more regular play. If you're going to play Forbidden Lands, I think you need to run it on with less, significant gaps between sessions and with consistent players. That's not to say that we didn't have consistent players. I will say as well, we had almost the entire same group both times with maybe one substitution. So it's not that. It's just that everybody runs their own games and has their own things and, watches TV and whatnot in between. So it's hard to remember what specifically happened. That said, fantastic game. And they've got, in addition to the core setting of the Ravenlands, they have the Bitter Reach now, and they released another one, the Crimson, I want to say Crimson Desert, but that is a video game. That is not this. Crimson something or other. There's a bestiary that came out for it as well, which is pretty cool. And there is... And that's the other thing, is how every encounter you have just gives you great... It feels like an event as opposed to an encounter. Where in the sense that even if it's just like finding a bit of architecture in a place where you didn't expect to find it. I think one of the things we rolled up was the players came across some ruins as they were trying to make their way across just snow-covered mountains. And while they were in the ruins, it was as if it was like a temperate climate. It was warm. They were protected from the wind in the middle of these standing stones. And that's just a cool, it didn't lead to anything. There wasn't a dungeon underneath. There wasn't a whatever else. It was just a fun little bit of environmental storytelling that comes from the random encounter part of the Forbidden Lands play. It's a game that gives you everything you need to stitch together a truly epic, grounded, and gritty campaign. It's just that it would require, I think, regular, consistent play in order to have it meet those lofty goals. But great game. Then, and last thing I'll say about that too, there is, similar to the Dungeons and Dragons, whatever it's called, DM's Guild, there's a free league library that has some phenomenal stuff on it. Like great ways of expanding different parts of the game. I believe it's like 400 pages that someone has written or someone has consolidated, plus other adventures, other settings. There's really terrific stuff. Next up, I'm going to that now, Anna. Starfinder. So Starfinder, we have only played 3 times this year. Starfinder, if you're not familiar, is the science fantasy RPG published by Paizo Publishing. This is the first edition I'm referencing, and it is soon to be a second edition that will be based heavily on the Pathfinder second edition game. Starfinder was... The thing I realized this year, having run one pickup session, I thought... For context, I have run the first module of 3 different adventure paths in this. The Against the Aeon Throne one, the Attack of the Swarm one, and the Threefold Conspiracy. And each of those modules was a ton of fun. Really well put together. We had fun players, interesting characters, and we only, though, covered from levels 1 to 3. And I should have known better than to try and extrapolate a full experience of a game from only those levels of play when it is a level-based, class-based game. Because if you judged any version of D&D from levels 1 to 3, you would be missing out on a big picture of what that game is like in long-term play. So I have that error. I also kind of bought into a bit of the... adventure path-itis with that one. I tend not to run adventure path games on the channel, in part because I'm just terrible at running them. I always want to make changes and want to, when players go off on their own things or introduce other things on the fly, which can interfere with the overall path. But I did not try running Starfinder because I had felt that, it's just a lot of combat encounters, and I didn't feel that the mechanics were justifying the actual gameplay. I recently, after running a one-shot in support of Owen Casey Stevens, one of the authors of this and the original line developer for Starfinder, he has been dealing with cancer diagnosis this year and has been undergoing treatment. So we ran a game to try and raise awareness of his need and to direct folks to where they could support him for it. I wrote something completely on my own, and I ran it, and I was like, oh, okay, this is I like this. I like this more than I did running the others. And I had subsequently, when the announcement of Starfinder 2nd Edition came out this year, which was going to be compatible with Pathfinder 2, I'll say that like I am going to get it. I'm going to probably run it, and I bet you it's going to be a terrific game. And I have said on the channel before, like, oh boy, I can't wait till they do that. But when it was announced, I was a little deflated, and I couldn't figure out why. And then I went back and reread everything, and I think that the reason is that it is a really good level-based science fantasy game, particularly once you get past 3rd level and you get into having enough of a range above you and below you to have interesting adversaries that are around, and you're starting to see the full, just like any other level-based game, you're starting to see what your class can actually do. And if I lean into some of my more, lenient or less rules-focused tendencies as a game master, there's some amazing shit you can make up for the game and improvise for the game because of its fairly solid mathematical basis. There's a new supplement that came out over the past year, I think, that is when the... Let's see here, Intergalactic, oh gosh, I can't remember the names offhand, but there's Starfinder Enhanced, which offered a couple of different ways of approaching like skill challenges and starship combat. The Starship Operations Manual, which I thought was very complicated on first read, is not as complicated as I had expected. Oh, Anna says hi. Hi, sweetie. The game itself is much faster playing than I remember it being. And yeah, I don't know. I just, whatever. Oh, and the other thing that clicked with this one this year, the Character Operations Manual offers a downtime mechanic. And the downtime mechanic is one of the best ones I've seen in any game, in part because a lot of games, it's great that they offer you downtime, but it sometimes is one of those forced things that game masters have to wedge into a game to give some space between events. No, I don't mean to paint a brush widely with everyone who's done that. I found that to be my problem in a game. And with Adventure Pass or pre-made adventures, it's rare that they give you and then you take a week and do nothing, So finding the time to engage with downtime mechanics in a role-playing game, even if they are amazing, is sometimes tricky. But in a Starfinder type game, you have days and weeks that you spend in travel, just like you do in Traveler. And we have had some fun in our Traveler campaign with respect to the downtime, that transit time that they have nothing else to do other than, do things on ship or deal with the problems that I've generated for them. But this gives you a whole set of rules of fun ways to do things that are not just combat or just rolling your skills against somebody, that I think adds a lot to the game and gives some meaningful structure to those opportunities where you could tell more stories and you could have more fun. So I've really come around the last little while, and we ran 2 sessions of Starfinder just before the end of the new year, and I had just so much fun writing them and running them. I really leaned into to try and do more of a keep it in the Starfinder setting, but do more of a pulpy kind of kick in the door betrayal by some unknown adversary kind of stuff. A very, well, I guess it's more noir than pulp, but like a pulpy noir kind of thing, to really capture the romance of the setting, in the sense that planetary romance is a bit about going to other places and finding beautiful princes or princesses or whatever, and there's a cross-world romance a la like John Carter. But planetary romance also refers to the evocative and loving attention to the setting, to these exotic locations for these. And that's something that Starfinder offers up in spades, because the type of travel that is a default in this, where the players have a ship that can get them pretty much anywhere, and they can bring with them as much stuff as kind of they need to, that frees you to go almost anywhere. in a Star Wars kind of way. And they have a really great they have a book that is about galactic exploration that gives you some amazing resources as a game master to give fun structure to that, or some random tables. And there's the planet creation deck they put out that also is a great fucking source of inspiration for wild ideas and completely different planets that you wouldn't have thought of necessarily yourself. So making for the planetary romance part of that was really fun in the sense of like new places and unexpected combos. But that's ignoring the setting itself. And one of the things I've always said about the game is that I absolutely love the setting. It is such a unique way. It's a setting in the sense that it's like Dungeons and Dragons in the way that it takes all of its inspirations and it transcends them to create something unique. Dungeons and Dragons is obviously an inspiration for it, even though it's a Pathfinder sort of direct, successor. It also has any sci-fi stuff you could conceive of, the Star Wars, Dune, Warhammer 40K, Star Trek. There's elements of all these things drawn into this world, but they're put in their own science fantasy vein, so they feel like their own thing, in the same way that, like, Dungeons and Dragons, even though it owes a lot to Tolkien and Howard and oh gosh, I've forgotten his name already, the other one who inspired Ash, but it just is it has places that are, as a game master, I find so much fun to think about and to write for. So it's a place I want to see the players go. I want to tell them how awesome this stuff is. And now that I've kind of realized how much there is to the game as it is, I'm much more interested right now in exploring that than I am in exploring a Pathfinder 2nd edition version of that. And I'm going to talk about Pathfinder 2 in a moment here, because it is one of my favorite games. But one thing that I would say is that with Pathfinder 2, the larger your group is, the slower the pace of play is in combat. Because everybody has 3 actions, whether they are a nameless chump that your players are going to take out in a moment or two, or whether they are one of the stars of the campaign. And a larger group necessitates, unless you're throwing giant monsters at them constantly, it necessitates more adversaries. And you can't just... Pathfinder 2, because it is so focused on math and everything being in relation to the scale of the characters, you can't just throw very powerful monsters at them, because the math will completely fuck them over and they'll get annihilated. They'll get critted more often. They'll have a hard time hitting and critting against the adversary. The adversary have way more hit points and do way more damage. So you have to do more numbers, of lower level adversaries, and every single one of those fuckers gets 3 actions. So it just, I don't think the pulpy space opera, science fantasy vibe of Starfinder, and this is my perspective on it too, so fair, this is what I think of what I want from Starfinder. I want the feel of Starfinder to be like Star Wars, but be its own setting, and I think that the larger the group, the less... the harder it is to sort of capture that with Pathfinder 2. So I don't know. I'm sure it's going to be, again, Paizo makes phenomenal games. I love Pathfinder 2. I loved Starfinder 1, so I'm sure they're going to do an excellent job of it. But I think that because... Oh, and the last thing I will say about Starfinder is, if you think, if you're not familiar with Starfinder and you think that it might be just Pathfinder 1st edition, but in space, it's a very different game. There are some fundamental changes about it, particularly with respect to your hit points and the different resources you have access to. It is honestly much closer to the Star Wars Saga Edition, where it was that was the last version of the Star Wars games that Wizards of the Coast put out, and it was a bit of a middle ground between 3.5 and 4th edition, although it really occupies its own kind of design space. Starfinder is like that. There are some things that are kind of similar to ideas they explored in Pathfinder Unchained and Pathfinder 2nd edition, and but it really is its own thing. So, you know, if what has held off looking into it has been that, well, I don't want to play Pathfinder in space, just rest assured it is genuinely not that. The last one for games that really made me rethink things was Soulbound. Soulbound is the Warhammer Fantasy roleplay game for the Age of Sigmar. Now, we ran a couple of these over the course of the session, and I went a bit back and forth on this, where we had a bunch of really good sessions with it. But what I will say is that it is one of the games where the more you prep and the more you are willing to go outside, I should say you, I don't want to project this on you. This is what my experience was. Maybe you would be similar, maybe not. What I found was the more I tried to adhere to an adventure, or the more that I tried to, and the less I prepped, the less satisfying of a game I would end up with. If I prepped and I figured out what kind of other fun resources players would have access to and made sure that players had like a cheat sheet or some other things, that definitely helped. The game itself, if you're not familiar, is set in a post-apocalypse. It is well after the world is. You almost might think of it as mythic. It's kind of like a more muscular version of Planescape, where there are what the player characters are doing in the default game is they are playing characters that have been blessed by some godlike entity, bound together in their souls, and then set out to make the world a better place. Unlike a lot of the Warhammer settings in general, 40k and fantasy, Soulbound is inherently hopeful. You are trying to build a better world. Your characters can spend downtime actions to do just that, to actually like cleanse areas of corruption. I say Planescape because there are, I think it's 10 different worlds, mortal realms they're called, and you can think of them like, if you are familiar with Planescape terms, as a lot of the adventure happens on the kind of edges of those planes, and then the deeper you go in, the more clearly attuned they are. So like the default setting from the book is one set on Akshi, on the plane of fire, and it's called the Great Parch, and there are connections between the different realms as well that influence the local region. So, you know, there's plants that grow, you know, where near one gate in the Great Parch where it is close to the plane of life. Similar to one when it's near the plane of death. It likewise has a similar influence when it's closer to the heavens. Similar thing. So you end up with this kind of interesting struggle between different, broadly speaking, forces. So like forces of order, forces of destruction, forces of death, and forces of chaos. Your character, the default style of play, is playing a hero of order, but the line now supports playing as destruction, as death. Doesn't have chaos out yet, but I'm sure that's going to come. But what really clarified the possibilities with the game was this supplement, Ulfenkarn, City at the Edge of Death. Not only because I love me some, you know, gothic horror stuff anyway, and Ulfenkarn is a city built in the on the edge of the realm, or in the realm of death. It's also been dominated by vampires and other undead and whatnot since a recent event called the Necroquake. But it also offers a style of play that is grim and perilous. So it is more grounded level of play and less epic. And honestly, I don't think I would be bothered by the epic style of play, but the thing I really liked about this is that, for one, the ability to improvise stuff on the fly was pretty evident once we started playing. And I saw this in other games, but what this one is, if you're not familiar with I shouldn't say the setting, there's an adventure we played called Something's Holdouts. It's a supplement or an adventure that was published 1 year before the release of this. And what that one features is the fall. Ulfenkarn used to be called, Soulhold or something like that. I can't remember what the name of the city was before, but it's the fall of that city and then the emergence. Mournhold. Mournhold, I think, is the name of the city beforehand. And it features the fall of that city to the person who dominates the city now, and one desperate night of just trying to stay alive to be able to get to your boat that's going to get you to safety. So it's a locked room kind of story, trying to figure out where they've locked themselves, deal with the things outside, and there's events that happen over the course of the session. There's an old 4th edition adventure called Dead by Dawn that I absolutely love. We ran it on the channel, I think, like 7 years ago or 8 years ago. I think I've run at least one other version of that, but it's one of my favorite 4th edition adventures. This is like that, but better. And I say better in the sense that it's regimented by time. It's regimented by what you can get and what you can prepare. So there's opportunities to explore, but then there's also things happening throughout it. And the game mechanics were so fucking good for this. Once players figured out sort of what their optimal strategy was with their heroes and were able to gain some resources, like even a shield, one of the characters who's really a sword and board fighter, did not have access to a shield until like right near the end of the first session. We're going to be concluding the adventure this month, but it's just that one session. I also had two NPCs or two or three NPCs as well that I think what I would do now is just I would add them in as little, like, effectively index cards, because they didn't need to have the full stats that the players did, and the stats on players are really not all that complicated either. But it was very easy to have the player characters truly be the stars of the session, but also have support NPCs with them that they could easily command, to offset the fact that they're not these phenomenally powerful soulbound characters. And man, I've always thought from reading Soulbound before that it has a really interesting mechanic for keeping your character busy with the task of making a better world, not only in combat, which was very interesting and exciting and very much like 4th edition in the sense that you have like minions and boss monsters and things like that. There's a bunch of other mechanics about Soulbound that I'm not going to do justice to, like Doom, but the downtime and the involvement of the players in making a better world always seemed like a really cool idea, and it was well supported by the downtime rules. And not to say that you need to spend your entire time doing that. You could be crafting, you could be learning new spells, you could be doing whatever you like with it. But this fits a tone that I like. I kind of like underdog, characters. I love the Gothic setting, and as far as building a better world is concerned, trying to overthrow a vampiric monarch who has turned an otherwise troubled city, originally built so people could directly commune with their ancestors, turned it into a place of nightmares and a seat of power for vampiric undeath. That's a pretty fucking cool campaign to approach to try and free, overthrow the monarch and reestablish Mournhold in place of Ulfenkarn. So so that was it really helped me clarify what was cool about the game and what I would what possibilities there would be with it. I'm very much looking forward to seeing our next session with that. So those are games that really kind of surprised me over the course of the year. Things we got to the table that I either wasn't familiar with or had never run before or hadn't run in a very long time, and got new thoughts from. It's not to say that, especially having talked about these now for a bit, obviously these are really great games. I think that. Or let me rephrase that. I really enjoyed running them. Whether they're great or not is another issue. But I really enjoyed these, and I think a good part of it comes from each of these now having a more robust library in their line history than what they did when I initially ran them. With the Cataclysm of Kang came out and gave me a new opportunity to look at the Marvel game. Starfinder likewise had a bunch of books that I really had not gone into in great detail, and when I did, I found so much stuff to enjoy about it. I'm just looking at things here. And Soulbound, Soulbound right now is in a really good place as far as the line is concerned, with, you know, core book and a great book on vehicles and artifacts. I think those are two separate books, though. One's on artifacts and magic, one's on vehicles, a bunch of different optional ways of playing the game, a couple of adventures out, overall mega campaign kind of setting, on a phenomenal bestiary, and now Ulfenkarn, which will be coming in print in the new year. So yeah, I think that's one thing too, is that even if the lesson I'm taking from this is, if I don't find a game appeal to me with an initial session of it, and I liked it enough to get it to the table, maybe wait and see what comes from the game line. So that is the last of the ones I finished. Let's try and talk about some games I loved. So again, this is not intended to talk about the campaign necessarily. It's the game itself. So, and I'll try and keep these short and sweet after I get a sip of coffee. Hi, everyone in chat. Hope everyone is having a wonderful first day of the new year. Now, Traveler, Mongoose, 2nd edition. We've been playing for 17 sessions now, and the two things I will say that I really love about this game is, well, three things I'll say. One, the life path generation. Doing life path generation all together and listening to those to the kind of backstory elements that players have. The way I'm viewing them is that those are things that are intended to show up and have some kind of meaningful impact on the campaign. They're not there to, like, oh, if you happen to travel here, you'll encounter these things, but they won't come up otherwise. They're the things about the history that the reason they matter is because we're going to see reference to them in the course of the gameplay. And that approach has allowed me to add some really, I've really enjoyed some fun elements to our campaign that specifically relate back to what the players have gone through in their previous life. So that's one thing that I think is just really fucking great about the life path system. The second thing is very simplistic mechanics. 2d6 plus your stat plus your stat modifier if you've got one, plus your level of training. And then we have also been playing with luck. So at the start of each session, each player rolls a d6 to add to them all together, and we've got our pool of luck that the players can draw from to add modifiers to their dice rolls on a one-for-one basis. We're also playing with some of the optional rules for advancement for XP, so characters can develop the skills where they have shortcomings. The game does do a good job of trying to make sure you've got like a baseline of competency of across all the different skills that you probably would find in the course of a game. But we found things like skills that recur pretty often, like recon or diplomacy. Like, they're just not coming, the players just didn't happen to have them, and they weren't part of those packages. So it's been nice that, the other thing we're doing is we're ignoring the education cap on players' learning skills, so they can have characters that develop into areas that they were not skilled before if they have been sort of forced into that niche. And even when they are not developing those, they've got access to a luck mechanic to kind of avoid the vagaries of bad dice rolls or lack of training, in the things. The final thing I'll say about this is the default campaign. I wrote about this on the Discord server a couple weeks ago, but the setup for Traveler that has always been sort of the assumed, or at least the default style of play, is you make all your characters through your life path. They all happen to have shares in a ship. You have a ship that's got a mortgage, and you're going out on adventures to pay down that fucking mortgage, to keep it, to take on jobs, take on cargoes, take on whatever. And it is easy to overlook how much story that enables, and how much investment in the world that encourages with the players. In order to do their job properly, they need to keep track of what shit costs. They need to keep track of what people are being paid and what the expenses are, which is a decision making that everybody gets to engage with. So, because everyone is presumably part of the same crew. It also means that planning where you're going, what you're picking up, is going to be very much based on the crew and where you're going to go and try and sell it. Do you have a lot of disposable income, and can you engage in some, some open trade or speculative trade? Do you have skills that might get you to a chance to get a really good bargain on something and then sell it for a high profit at another place? What shit's happening when you're showing up in starports, and as you encounter elements of your past, or as you're hired on to do other jobs? It's just, I think. You also, by deciding where you're going, that requires you to learn more about the setting. It requires you to learn how far you can travel. It requires you to make plans to upgrade your jump engine or upgrade your ship overall. And all of that stuff, all of those decision-making exercises in the setting or in the game, it just feeds back in. For one, the players are thinking about the fiction and the setting in order to make those decisions effectively, and they're doing it all together. Like, if there are problems at the table where the players aren't working together, or someone's disinterested in doing that, that is not a fault of the game. That is a fault of the people playing the game. The game itself gives you the structure to get everyone thinking together. And some of my favorite decisions that we've seen in our campaign, and this was true in the previous one too, is figuring out, well, where the hell are we going to go, to be able to sell this stuff? Or how do we, satisfy the need to make a little bit of money to pay for stuff, while also avoiding, maximizing our opportunity to work side jobs and things like that. What do we do when we've got a job and something comes up, either related to the character backstory or unrelated to a character backstory, or just circumstances? I love seeing the players making those decisions of where they're going to go and how they're going to, approach things, and whether a side quest is worth undertaking for. It's just so much fun, and a lot of that. I mean, obviously the players are the biggest credit for all the interesting decisions that are happening in the campaign, but it is the structure, I think, that sets up the decision-making matrix, if you will, for how they're deciding to do these things. And it's just amazing. It's unlike any other game that I run, and I just love it. It's Traveller is one of my all-time favorite games to run. I had not run it on the channel for a very long time, and I'm so glad that we're back, and I've had a chance to remember just how fucking awesome the game is. Next one up, one of my favorites, Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Now, I have said some unkind things about Pathfinder 2nd Edition with respect to large-scale groups, and I don't mean to be targeting one campaign in general with it. Our Kingmaker campaign has 6 players in it, which means that when I have a lot of smaller things on the table, I feel that the combat takes longer than maybe I would like. I've not had any of the players tell me that. It is just that I am a very impatient person, and I want to get through those things. I want combat to be interesting. I love some good combat rules, and combat in Pathfinder 2 can be a shit ton of fun. But you need to sort of saddle up for a longer duration when you're going to have a lot of things on the table. We had one fight in our Spires of Paradar campaign that lasted 3 hours, and it was a very epic encounter involving a dragon and a bunch of crazy undersea parasite brain creatures. So I don't think it was inappropriate, but it does mean you need to kind of pick your times for it. This also saw this year the release of Pathfinder Core, which I did not use because at the last second I realized I did not have a Pathfinder image loaded into my streaming computer. I needed to find one. If you're not familiar, what Pathfinder Core was an effort by Paizo to respond to Wizards of the Coast thinking out loud that they might revoke the open gaming license. And if you're not familiar with the history of it, Pathfinder 2 obviously is an outgrowth of Pathfinder 1, which was based on the open game license and was designed kind of as a Dungeons & Dragons 3.75 version, so sharing many of the same similarities with D&D 3.5, but with some changes. And then the game line went off in its own direction afterwards and became really its own thing in the very best of ways. But with them rumbling about that, there was a lot of hubbub in the gaming community. But the thing that Paizo said was that Paizo had, in my mind, the most constructive response of any of the publishers, and it was that we are going to put out a license that anybody could use, that cannot be revoked, that blah, blah, blah. So effectively an OGL, or something like the OGL, that is not at the whims of some corporate person rejecting it. Now, I'm not going to get into the particulars of the legality of these things. If you want to see that from the perspective of a lawyer, Legal Eagle, the very, very popular YouTube channel, has a great analysis of it. Both as a lawyer and as a gamer, I think it's a extremely well done analysis of what the issue is, and like the copyrightability of game mechanics and things like that, and the orc response. But it was great. I thought, just rather than people bitching about it or whatever, having the constructive response of saying, this is what we're going to do proactively to help not only us, but everybody else. But what that also meant was that they needed to release a version of the game that would be free of that. Now, you might think that this is just a cash grab, right? The product line is, I don't know, 3-4 years old at this point. Maybe it's 5 years old. Can't remember when it was released. 2018, maybe? So yeah, maybe it is 5 years old. And there may be some truth to that. I don't think so, because the game has gone nothing from strength to strength and selling more, copies and becoming more popular. And it also, so I just don't see it as that. But they didn't need a cash influx necessarily, or at least I'm not aware of it. But it remains the case that, do I really want to buy 2 more fucking books that I have to get because it's going to be the new core set for it? And that does suck. And I was pretty salty about having to pay the money for it rather than getting an extra book. I completely understood and completely accepted that it was something they needed to do in light of what someone else was doing with the licensing. So that is completely fine. But it's a lot of money to spend on some books that I felt I already had. Since the release, there are some mechanical changes to the game, but very minor and very situational. There's some things that have been taken out or renamed that were very D&D identified. There's some new stuff that's been put in. But what I will say is that if the goal was to try and streamline the use of Pathfinder books at the table and to make the game easier to understand, easier to play at the table, and the books to be more user-friendly, I would be hard-pressed to think what better of a job they could have done. When I got the books in my hand and I ran Pathfinder 2 for the first time afterwards, I was blown away by just how good of a job they did. There's stuff that's been taken out. GM Core, Pathfinder has traditionally been a one-book system, one core book to cover everything. This is the first time they split things out into 2. I should say that's not 100% true. Pathfinder is a 2-book system because you need monsters, right? So typically it's been the Pathfinder core book and the bestiary. Now it's 3, just like D&D's been since the AD&D days, where it's got player core, DM core, and I can't remember if it's called monster core or bestiary. I think it's called Monster Core, maybe? I don't know. It's not out yet, in any event. But they've done a phenomenal job of making it laying out the books. If you have to pay the money to get it, get a second one, this is as good of a circumstance as it could have been. If you have the core book, and you are wondering whether you need to buy these in order to understand stuff going forward, so long as you don't mind using the very good index at the back of the Pathfinder 2 core book to find whatever things they're referencing, or to make use of a table of concordance to see what's changed as far as what things are named, then you don't really need to. There's a couple small changes. The Hero Lab, the kind of one of the official character generators for the system, and Roll20 both have options for using Pathfinder Core or Pathfinder Second Edition Core or Pathfinder Second Edition Core Rulebook. So you're not going to be frozen out of the market, as it were, for it. But if either you haven't run the game before and you were looking to get into Pathfinder 2, the Player Core, GM Core are a phenomenal way to start. It's missing a couple classes that are from the Pathfinder Core book, but those will be coming out in a supplemental book later this year, and it includes one class that wasn't in the core book, the Witch. So, as far as the game is concerned, while I have my reservations about using it for larger scale groups, it is such an easy game to write stuff for and to run. I think it makes for, you need to be mindful of the threat of criticals. So the core rulebook suggests that you can scale up to like 3 or 4 levels above the player characters and 3 or 4 levels below. But just be aware that those 4 generally will come with a +4 difference, which means it's like a 20% greater chance of a critical being struck. In Pathfinder 2, unlike any other version of like a D&D-esque level-based game, you score criticals when you roll 10 over your target number, which means critical hits, especially if you've got bigger bonuses, are a lot more common. And bigger adversaries, like in 5th edition, do more damage based on their level. So, yeah. But as long as you're cautious against that and don't, I find that 2 levels above the players with some other stuff, like at disadvantageous situations, makes it a really challenging and fun fight. It also means that lower level adversaries, once you get past 2 levels below, they're kind of meaningless because they're very unlikely to hit the players unless they're all ganging up. And the trouble, I don't know. I need to give some thought to the level, the different actions. Maybe there's a way of working around that. But at the end of the day, it also means that because lower level adversaries get 3 chances to attack players with a decreasing chance, there's at least a chance they're going to hit. And if they do hit on if they need a 20 to hit and they do get a crit, the damage on a crit's not going to be substantially, it's not going to be anywhere near what a more powerful adversary would be. So it'll be that reflective, how did that skeleton get me, kind of situation. I find that I can run almost any kind of game with it. I have elected to not use it for our Night Below campaign, and I'll tell you why in a second, but I think that anything that, notwithstanding my comments about how much I love Starfinder 1st edition, Starfinder 2nd edition, I'll bet you is going to be fantastic. And I'll bet you will give you lots of opportunities to run lots of different types of stories, because the math at the core of Pathfinder 2 is just rock solid. And it really allows you, so long as you're mindful of those, the threat of critical hits. For instance, I'm running Kingmaker right now. I would not use the random encounter tables that they have with the different zones in that, because the game isn't designed to accommodate that. What it might accidentally serve up is an utterly lethal encounter that is unfair from a mathematical perspective. So you need to be mindful of that. That's the game you're playing, and just structure around that. What I have done to mitigate against that is, rather than having just a list of random monsters with random numbers, I will randomly generate the challenge of the adversary and what kind of adversary. So or challenge of the encounter and what kind of adversary. So let's say I roll an easy encounter, and it's with stuff that is comparable to the player character's level. Well, then I won't, include a number of similar scaled. Anna really has thoughts on Pathfinder 2 as well. I won't include a number of things that are equal to their level. I'll include a little less than that. or if I roll a hard one with a bunch of low-level adversaries in comparison to the characters, I just make a ton of them, or, you know, make some changes to them. I use some of the variants that are in the bestiaries or in the adventure paths that, or tweak to, you know, something else to fit it, because reskinning monsters is very easy in that. And that allows you to have that random encounter stuff that they're trying to capture in that game without ignoring the peril of accidentally throwing a manifestly unfair adventure or encounter against your characters. So yeah, Pathfinder 2 is just one of the things that I'll close on why I love running this game is it is so easy to prep for. I find that I can rely on the math, I can rely on the encounters, and I can rely on the players being able to do enough to survive the encounters or handle the encounters. So yeah, thoroughly love that game. Next up is something I only got to the table once: Wrath and Glory. Now, I don't know how they're counting the additions for this. Wrath and Glory is technically a second revised printing of a game that was originally put out by Ulysses Spiele. This version is put out by Cubicle 7. The Cubicle 7 version is the one that I'm going to be referring to, because I have the Ulysses Spiele one, but I wasn't crazy about it. I didn't quite get the game. I will say that the Wrath and Glory, as a caution, 2 players who played in it both found that some of the nomenclature they have used for different things in the game that were introduced by Ulysses Spiele that Cubicle 7 carried over was confusing for them. And it was confusing for me when I read the game. They don't use the term successes necessarily as a mechanic. They use a thing called icons. The gameplay in the game largely boils down to rolling pools of d6s. A 4 or 5 is an icon or a success. Other games would call it a success. A 6 is an exalted icon, which would count as 2. And I can't remember if you need to roll 2 of them or not for it to count as an exalted. I don't think you do. I think I'm confusing it with another game, Outgunned. But in any event, that's the core mechanic of this. And then you can shift things. So if you roll an exalted icon, a 6, you can shift it to make it into a narrative metacurrency, very much like Momentum from 2D20 Cone, any of the 2D20 games, or if you had a shared pool for Fortune. Yeah, Fortune? I can't remember what they called it in Fantasy Flight Star Wars, but in any event, it's Momentum, basically. Because they intentionally decided to rename all these things, I found when I was reading it, it took a couple of times for me to really process of like, okay, what the fuck are you talking about? There's not a good reason in the game that I can think of mechanic-wise, for the sake of clarity, to call these things icons and exalted icons. It is just a bit of flavor stuff for the setting that they injected that I think is a disservice to what is otherwise an extraordinarily good game. The game has 4 different tiers to play, and that allows you to use the single game to run everything from street gangs in a hive city all the way up to like inquisitors and space marine librarians, and not have to use a different game and not be burdened by a huge amount of information. The game, I found, was very light on its feet. It gave me lots of ways to engage the players in different ways. I think the psionics in the game are the closest to the representation in fiction of any of the games that I have run. The other games that we've run, and again, I don't mean this to be clear, I don't mean this as a slight against like Rogue Trader or Death Watch or anything like that. They're extraordinarily good games, just for someone like me who likes to kind of keep things moving and not get bogged down in certain things, and also wants the players to be able to actually use some of their abilities with a threat of consequence. This makes characters feel much more competent, especially psychers, and consistent with what we see in fiction. in fiction, we don't regularly see in the Warhammer 40k novels, at least the ones I've read. So Gaunt's Ghost, one of the Space Marine ones, and the first whatever his name is, Eisenhorn ones. You do not. I don't think in any of those we see a Psyker go try to manifest a character and then go wild. We see Psykers affected by the warp. We see them lose control of things at times, but never a named character. It's always background characters who have this happen to them. So it just doesn't make sense to me that the players would be Psykers in particular, would be so heavily punished. And Wrath and Glory allows them even at low level play. We played our single session at tier 2. And I just loved it. It gave us what I felt was a solid set of game mechanics, really responsive, really adaptable, that allowed us to play with it's similar to Soulbound. It has minions and boss monsters and things like that, and it was really fun having that lighter touch gameplay where we're just sort of I had an adventure plan and the players kind of went in a different direction, and I was able to do that. I was able to follow up on that stuff, and the game was able to keep up with it. And that's fun because it's the setting itself. If you're playing a 40k game, you're playing because you want to be in the 40k setting. So I really like that. It definitely feels like a more cinematic experience, I guess. But to be honest, the characters in Rogue Trader, at least, and certainly in Deathwatch, are a lot more robust than what they seem to be. When you actually play the game, the way it's written, characters don't take nearly as much damage on a regular basis as what you would expect, and it's not nearly as lethal of a game as what I think it might appear to be. So it's not like Rogue Trader is not cinematic. It's just this one, I don't know. It was neat being able to engage. It's just a really interesting game mechanic that allowed me to do a lot of, in the sense of giving game mechanic structure to different things, like a negotiation or whatever. I really, really liked it. I have not run enough of it to be able to comment further. Similar to some of the other games I've mentioned, the game line's in a really healthy spot right now where it's got the core book out. It has one book of optional rules that expands out some stuff for NPCs and some stuff for the players. It's called Archives of the Empire, Redacted Records. Redacted Records 1 is out in print and PDF. Redacted Records 2 is out in PDF and soon to be in print. There is effectively a monster book put out called the Xenos Codex or something like that. That is like the Soulbound Bestiary, fucking awesome. It's so good. I can't believe how much stuff they have in that one book. They got a book on vehicles that's out. They got a setting book for it. And one of the things that one of our players mentioned is that the default setting for it in the book, he was not crazy about. And I think it's because I had not even thought about that. I so rarely concern myself with the default settings in any games that and especially for licensed things like this. 40K is wide and vast, and I've got a bunch of other games or things. I would probably not set it in the setting they've got, where there's sort of an assumption that any adversaries can, you can have an Eldar working alongside a Orc, working alongside a Space Marine. But to be honest, that's kind of what you're allowed to do in Rogue Trader anyway. So if you're running that style of campaign, you can have that cross-pollination. But if you choose to just, focus on one part of the Warhammer world, or the 40K world at least, the game can more than adequately handle that kind of stuff. So I don't know about long-term experience, because the way the experience works is similar to some superhero games like Mutants and Masterminds 3rd, where you reach a certain point where you've gained enough XP, you sort of have to go on to the next tier, in which case you're playing a bit of a different game. But there are rules around that, so I don't know if that's a concern, and I have not seen characters obviously go from one tier to another tier at this point, so I don't know. What I can tell you is I really, really, really enjoyed that session. I really enjoyed, once the game clicked for me, I really enjoyed how how I had a better handle on mechanically challenging the players, both in terms of the adversaries and the game mechanics, and structuring the other, challenges they'd be encountering over the course of the campaign. And it has a downtime rule. It has downtime rules, which I fucking love. So if you're playing a campaign that is about them having, a rogue trader ship, or a base, or a settlement, or a part of a platoon, or a regiment, you can have those downtime moments and let players make interesting decisions based on what the characters are doing during those times. So really, really cool game. Next up is a little bit of an obscure one. I don't know if folks will have heard of this before, but it's Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. It was funny. I've included a link in the description of this video to every one of the games I'm talking about today. And this was the only one where I was like, do I really need to put a link to Wizards on it? Like, is someone really going to not know where to go to learn more about D&D 5th? So I'll spare some stuff about D&D 5th, but here, I'll tell you the things that I have particularly enjoyed about the switch to 5th edition with our Night Below campaign. So one of the things, however you feel about Wizards of the Coast, Dungeons and Dragons itself is, I think, there are things about it that I just fucking love, and I will love. There are aspects of D&D settings and games that just do not get replicated in other games in part because of legal reasons, but also because it's just, some stuff is just inherent to their settings. Like, in particular, Beholders, and particularly Mind Flayers. I fucking love Illithids. And having an opportunity to play our campaign in Greyhawk, which is about as D&D as you can get it, and then using D&D to run that, it feels like less of a need to make a square peg fit a round hole than it would be if I was using, say, Pathfinder 2nd edition. I don't need to... by selecting Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, for the most part, I can use everything that is published for 5th edition and have it be part of Greyhawk. Obviously, things like, the Artificers, that probably wouldn't fit in here because it's just never been part of the setting. You can make the setting what you want. So, I'm self-restricting for what stuff I'm including as Greyhawk, but more often than not, I can keep everything in there, particularly with the wild stuff that was added in 3.5. I can include everything I want from Dungeons and Dragons and have it find a place where it can occupy, it can be in Greyhawk. Pathfinder 2, there'd be a lot of that game that I would be ignoring or having to kind of hive off. The Gunslinger would not be, in my mind, appropriate for a Greyhawk setting if you're trying to do a proper, authentic Greyhawk, 2nd edition or 1st edition experience. I don't think that the Alchemist really fits with how alchemy's been portrayed in D&D traditionally, but again, your mileage may vary with that. Obviously, your version of Greyhawk's gonna be different from my version of Greyhawk, which is different from any other version. But in my mind, that's one reason why D&D appealed, is that it's playing Dungeons and Dragons again. While I haven't run it regularly in the channel, it's also a game I really love. When I have run it, I've really enjoyed 5e, particularly at the mid-range levels, because it just feels like you can have a lot of great, exciting combat while still having some pretty significant stakes. Like, people talk about 5e not being deadly, and I just don't think that... I don't know. We've nearly lost a character a couple of weeks ago to one encounter that really was not. It was just the way that the encounter rolled out. I don't really find that 5e is more or less deadly. I feel that characters have more things they can do because they can recover. They have a lot more abilities that are regularly usable, and they can be recovered much more quickly. But as someone who loved 4th edition, none of that shit bothers me. It means that the players always have cool shit they can do. And while there is a part of the game that I always love about, particularly that Night Below campaign, but Dungeons and Dragons in general, about resource management, right? Like, have you used up all your spells? Have you used up all your things? But I have other ways to do that, thanks to I should have grabbed it before, phenomenal supplement from Cubicle 7 called Uncharted Journeys. Not everyone is going to enjoy having a heavily abstracted kind of travel experience with the game, with their game. They're going to want to have more of a, like, track how many rations you have and how many, uses of water you have and whatnot. But if what you want is the feel in a 5th edition game of players, a feeling of, what's the word I'm looking for here? A feeling of the lack of resources, or a feeling of there is a word I'm looking for, but it's escaping me right now. New year, new brain apparently. If you want to feel them that they're actually, like, there is scarcity, if you want to feel the scarcity in the game, this gives you some fucking great options for capturing that. You know, the feeling that, yeah, you got all these big powers and big spells and you can fight through things, but if you're not able to just create, have a long rest, which is what is the reset button in 5th edition, or if it is more challenging and you have to make decisions as to how you're going to go and try and engage that, it makes that a much less, the characters have some phenomenal stuff, and if they can get a short rest, they can get a lot of their abilities back, but making that short rest a little more challenging, or making them blow hit dice to be able to recover abilities, which are options from this, man, that makes it for a very different play experience. It's much more desperate and much more long-term tactical in the sense, or maybe strategic is what I'm thinking of. It's strategic in the sense of, like, you're making the decision of how to make use of your resources and your time over the course of a longer engagement with an enemy, like a dungeon crawl, as opposed to the tactical decisions you're making for positioning and use of specific powers. The two of them working together give players options to think about both in a way that I think is really fucking cool. And the players seem to really enjoy the versions of their characters that they are playing in the Night Below campaign, at least. And we ran a one-shot of Eberron recently to introduce one of our players, James, to 5th edition, because he'd never played it before. And I've run Eberron 4 or 5 times over the past couple of years now using 5th edition, and for my money, it's the very best. It's the closest to my picture of what Eberron should be like in terms of the pulp action side of things. There are also, another reason I love using 5th edition now is the amount of excess stuff and third-party books that I have for 5th edition that add great stuff, like Uncharted Journeys, like the various monster books that Kobold Press puts out, like some of the magic books, including the magic book from Kobold Press, or the Griffin's Saddlebag. And then, oh, darn it. Come on, Madison. Quit knocking shit over. And they, Cubicle 7, as part of their 5th edition line, just released for Kickstarter backers, A Life Well Lived. This is a supplemental book to the Uncharted Journeys book, and this one offers similar rules. There's some backstory, life path stuff in it, which looks really interesting, but for the purpose of an ongoing game, for me, stuff for camping, stuff for downtime that is equal to what Starfinder offers as far as downtime is concerned. Rules for mentors, rules for building your house, not building a stronghold, just building a place, a base of operations for your characters, which is really cool, and retirement for characters. So it's a really neat, example of the kind of cool stuff that's out there for 5th edition that I have used in past to adapt over for my own purposes for the other games we've run, but being able to just use it as written is just a shit ton of fun. I'm setting aside all the issues that Wizards of the Coast has as a publisher in terms of shitty things to some of their creators, shitty things to some of their creatives, shitty things to the industry in general, the corporate shenanigans of fucking Hasbro, and my thoughts go out for all the employees who were recently laid off at Wizards of the Coast. So there is that issue, but I don't see the bright line between their shitty activities and what any other shitty corporation does, you know, as far as the treatment of workers, treatment of people. So I don't mean that to excuse the, you know, like, well, we're going to use it in spite of them, but I just don't think there are the same kinds of egregious, for my own bright lines that they've engaged in that prevent me from feeling comfortable running 5th edition, particularly when I'm supporting a bunch of third-party publishers. It gives me the opportunity to support third-party publishers who I do really love, and I don't have any, you know, concerns about supporting them. So that is 5th edition. 5th edition has been one of my favorite games. I did really love 5th when it first came out. It felt like such an interesting and unique take on it. No one had any idea just how popular it would become and how much of a juggernaut it was. So, you know, one of the concerns I had with potentially making the switch was that, well, it's yet another channel running yet another 5th edition game. But at the end of the day, like, the only reason that would be a concern is if you feel the need to stand out in a crowd and in order to properly monetize your you know, content. It's not what we do the channel for. We do the channel to run games that we really enjoy with people we like playing with, hopefully for people who like watching it, you know. And with that in mind, that's why, you know, 5th edition feels like it's been a really great choice for this part of our Night Below campaign in particular. And it also, I talked in the 13 campaigns stream too about some 5th edition inspired games like Iron Kingdoms or what's the other one, Grim Hollow, great, you know, 5th edition focused games that would also make for really, really fun campaigns in a non-traditional 5e kind of format. Next up is Pinnacle Entertainment's Savage Worlds. Now, Savage Worlds is, my goodness, Savage Worlds is one of my absolute favorite games to run, except for when it's not. So I love so much about this game. It fits so many of my sensibilities, and I feel like the only times I really disconnect from, I don't know why I'm giving it such damning it with faint praise. Savage Worlds has given us some of our best sessions, not only this year, but over the past few years. Savage Worlds Adventure Edition is an extraordinarily fun game. Hi, Anna. Not only does it offer a fantastic, I said this on the 13 campaign stream too, but it's not that it's a game that is a generic game, although you can use it to run a ton of different settings or genres or whatever. It is an action role-playing game. It is trying to capture a pulpy action experience from the types of characters you play, to the types of worlds you play in, to your play experience at the table, to the way that you do things in the game. Everything is designed to kind of maximize excitement. And I don't mean that in a Michael Bay-ish kind of always moving camera type of way of like, there are a variety of different really fascinating subsystems that the game has incorporated into the Adventure Edition that builds on some of the ideas that other creators have introduced, and it has made for some of my absolute fucking favorite sessions of the past few years. And our Guard campaign, I cannot tell you how long I've wanted to run an ongoing superhero campaign, and this has exceeded my expectations as far as a game that gives us the experience of what in my mind it's like reading comic books. Not necessarily the cinematic versions of them, but just reading comics, the shit that happens in comics that people do with their powers, that happens to them over the course of their stories, that allows for truly thrilling turns of events. nothing else compares. Savage Worlds, as far as I really like the Marvel Multiverse setting. Savage Worlds is my favorite superhero game. The Superheroes Companion is fantastic. I am really looking forward to the really looking forward to the horror. I was thinking of GURPS Horror is why Ken Height's GURPS Horror is a fucking amazing product, regardless of what game you use. Anna, come on. Hey, get out of there. Anna's getting used to pulling out plugs. Yes, hello. Hello, my girl. What was also great about Savage Worlds, the variety of settings you can play in, the amount of resources available from the publisher for picking up and playing with a one-sheet game, the ease with which of getting people into play, the exciting characters they get to play. It's just an absolutely fantastic game. Again, like other ones, not the only game, I wouldn't use it to run everything, but why would you want to, with a variety of amazing role-playing games that are in print, why the fuck would you ever want to run just one? But our Savage Worlds session in the charity one-shot too, was incredible. Like, it was this kung fu style thing set in the the time just before the Boxer Rebellion in China, 19th century China, and it just was such a fun encounter. The pace of combat in it is absolutely thrilling in Savage Worlds, in part because of the narrative metacurrencies that you get use of, in part because of the unexpected exploding dice, and in part because of the incredible use of cards for initiative. I've mentioned this a number of times before, but there are few games that can match the thrill around a table when somebody flips a joker in initiative and everybody gets a Benny when they really need one, and then they get to act before their enemies when they really need to. There's few other games that can engender that kind of just thrilling experience. I don't have enough, again, not a game I would necessarily use to run everything, but for just a pure fun game, my God, it's such a great game. It's such a well-designed thing. And credit to the creators as well. I mentioned this on the 13 campaign stream too, but it keeps resonating with me, or I keep thinking about it, that it's the same designers who did the original Savage Worlds, and it's so rare that you see people making such substantial changes to their game and their products after each thing when they're the same people behind it. So it's a huge kudos to Shane Lacey Hensley and, who are the other? Now, Shane is still with the company. Shane Lacey Hensley and Clint Black. Huge credit to both of them. It's extremely impressive, and really, for folks who have been in the industry for as long as I've been playing games in the industry, it's incredible to see them being like, okay, well, how can we do something better this time with every single product they seem to put out? So amazing. Great publisher, great game. Can't wait for more Savage Worlds in the near future. Next up is Warhammer Fantasy 4th. We ran this originally, like several years ago, just before the pandemic began, and that campaign kind of stalled out. We started playing something different, in part because I was unfamiliar. I was not familiar with what had happened as far as developing the setting from the time that I had Warhammer First Edition, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay First Edition, until, the time this thing came out. I did run Warhammer Fantasy Third Edition, and I really love that game, but it's impossible to run online. It's a game that I feel like it only really can be effectively played in person. And now I would be hard-pressed to say why we would want to play that instead of Fourth. Fourth Edition, published by Cubicle 7, is a return to more of the style of game that Warhammer Fantasy 2nd and Warhammer Fantasy 1st was, but it introduces a number of really interesting innovations, including 4 different varieties of narrative metacurrency. There's a neat idea called momentum in the game. The game also makes use of, similar to what I discussed about GURPS, where you make a check and your degree of success has a factor and an impact on the outcome of your roll, particularly if it's contested. Attacks are a single roll, so you're not rolling damage separately, which is pretty fucking cool. And you have character mechanics that take advantage of that degree of success thing, where they'll grant you bonuses to the amount of that what you succeed. It has the same career-focused options as Warhammer Fantasy First and Second, but they are consolidated. The characters also feel, in comparison to Second Edition at least, there is more granularity to the characters. You're not taking big 5-point jumps, and you're not limited by the cap of how much you can go up. So I feel like the characters have more legs as far as like experience is concerned. The setting, now that I am feeling more comfortable and more with my knowledge of the setting, that I can accurately run something like it and not, be misrepresenting a setting that people care a great deal about. I just love this game. Like, the characters are also much more competent than they were in Second Edition. I ran Second Edition, and it's a great game. Starting characters are kind of chumps, which was not a lot of fun to play. And the fact that this game deals with ties and contested rolls so well, there isn't they rolled this, so you parry, so there's no result, is, I think, a huge strength of the game. I really like that it gets towards the resolution. Violence should be consequential in Warhammer, and it is in this game. But fun, the criticals can be just horrific, but they can be as little as like you got, a bleeding wound that requires you to pay attention to it, or is otherwise, you get a limp that'll last until the end of combat. The crits don't feel as, they don't feel as bad as what they might, like, not PF2 are just, you get hit a lot harder when you crit. These crits feel flavorful and appropriate for the setting. It's a setting I like playing. It is the type of adventures that you play in it as well just feel closer to what I like to write, which is that, violence is definitely going to be a part of the game, but it's not necessarily the whole focus of it. Our Night Below campaign is not a great example. Night Below is a very different, because it's more of a classic D&D style thing where there is a lot of monster bashing involved, but that's not true. There's also travel and whatnot, so I don't know, I'm being overly critical maybe, but it's just a fantastic game. I love that you can keep player characters. There's a high ceiling for their advancement, so they're not going to outpace the challenges in the game. I like that there's a great deal of variety in the game. I like that they give you options for wholly embracing random character generation or playing precisely what you want. It's great to offer characters, or there's a middle ground between the two. It's great that you can do that. The setting is, I think, just a shit ton of fun to play into. So dealing with the sort of inherent silliness of the old world with their football hooligan orcs and stuff like that, and the scheming Skaven is just a ton of fun. And the game is just, it gives you a solid rule set from which to play that stuff with competent characters. My only criticism is that I really wish they would put out a proper, just like, bestiary to give me a shit ton of stats with adversaries that I could just use. They have put out a kind of bestiary called the Imperial Zoo, which gives you a bunch of monsters and reworks some of the math and how the monsters work. But I would really love to have what we had in some older versions of the game, where it's just like, here's 6 Skaven adversaries you can use, complete with their talents and their skill levels and whatnot, because you are kind of forced to do that with this. It's a minor thing because it's not a difficult thing to do, but I have always had a soft spot for Warhammer Fantasy First Edition, and I never played the Fantasy Battles game, but I had the 40k Rogue Trader, so it's always been one of those settings that I've always kind of held a torch for. It's part of the reason I went so hard into Third Edition, because I was broke student when Second Edition was out. But with this one, it's a solid foundation, and then over the course of the publication history, since the game came out, they've released a ton of amazing things, including one sourcebook that we kind of fell into using as the setting of our sourcebook. Salzenmund is the setting for our current campaign, and it's great. It's a place I never would have thought about setting a campaign. It's a really well done sourcebook, and the other thing I guess I would say is, in a similar vein to Savage Worlds, I love that they're not worried about course correcting with some of their rules, because the 3 core, kind of quasi-core supplements that have come out recently, Up in Arms, which is like the martial or combat book, Winds of Magic, which is the magic book, and the Imperial Zoo, which is the monster book, each of those has also addressed and provided optional rules that are heavily encouraged for some elements of the gameplay that were criticized. So rather than releasing a new edition, and rather than pissing off people who are already playing it, they just said, here's these source books, and if you want to make use of these additional rules, here's what we think, even given the opportunity to do it again, this is what we would be doing with magic, with certain parts of combat, and with the monsters, to make them play the way we intended. So that as well is just great. I think it's really impressive that, and I should say, don't take that to think that the core book is busted or broken or anything like that. It's just that these are options to tweak things that have emerged over long-term play, not things that are seen as fundamental, unworkable ideas in the core book. I love this game. Our campaign is a ton of fun, and one of the to-do things in 2024 is to prep up a couple of short one-shots with it, because there's a source book. I don't think it's in print yet, but there's a collection of short adventures that come out. At least 2 of them look awesome, like one evening games that I would love to have prepped. The final one from this year that I want to talk about is Twilight 2000. So I mentioned earlier about how well I thought that Forbidden Lands went, but I mentioned my concerns with that. Twilight 2000 is a game that, likewise, I owned as a kid, the GDW version of it. The second edition was the one that I was the most familiar with, and I loved it. It was such a neat idea for a kid who did not, I was not involved in the military. I didn't have any family members involved in the military, but the kind of post-apocalyptic setting that they set up, and it just seemed such a different place to play than what any of the other role-playing games I had were. So it's occupied kind of a bit of a romantic place in my mind. I think I ran it like 2 or 3 times, but nothing really that I couldn't tell you what happened in those adventures. I know we created characters for it. I have no idea how long we played. I remember that there were aspects of the game rules that I found very hard to parse as a kid. So we kind of stopped playing that and went back to a more simple game. So and then this game came out. It was kickstarted, and then because of it came out almost immediately before or during the initial invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And given the setting is not Ukraine, it's Poland, but I didn't feel like it would be appropriate having streaming something that was an Eastern European country that was being dealing with post-war, and kind of, it felt like if the things we were seeing in our session, if those things would be matching up with actual newsreels that were contemporary with our games, I didn't feel comfortable running it as that. And then time passes, and this year we got together a single session of it because quite a few of the players had talked about how much they enjoyed it, or Carl from our channel is running it on his channel, the GMologist channel, which you should go check out and subscribe to. He's running some great games over there, as well as some interesting interview content too. But Carl's been running it for quite a while, and George had talked about wanting to play it as well. So we just picked a time and I set up some pre-gens and we ran it. And in the course of prepping the game, so like refreshing myself with the rules and setting up what was going to happen and diving into some of the first edition content I had and, prepping stuff, I just, as far as a sandbox setting is concerned, man, like it just was so different. I've been getting into lately for video games, playing DayZ to a degree, and also lately I've been playing Days Gone. And I'm a big fan of like zombie fiction and, you know, zombie games, as evident by our All Flesh Must Be Eaten game last year. We're going to be getting Walking Dead to the table next year, which is going to be a lot of fun. But this idea of like a post-apocalypse that just sort of shuffled into itself. Yeah, I really love that idea, and the game gives you so much stuff to work with. You know, like it really gives you a phenomenal amount of stuff for sandboxing around in the world. Unlike any of the other games, any of the other Free League games, this one doesn't tell you to read everything. This one doesn't tell you to prep a bunch of stuff. What it tells you, pick a spot in a map, roll some random encounters or draw cards if you've got that, and start playing and just see what happens. And that, to me, is just the ground that is not only going to be a fascinating campaign that I would love to see unfold, because you get to see what the players are building. It's rare that I get surprised by stuff that isn't just on a session-by-session basis. But when I'm surprised by what happens and then what the characters choose to do, which might affect the arc of the overall campaign, that is fascinating to me. And that's the stuff I love doing, having to respond to that and adapt whatever I might have planned beforehand or come up on the fly. All that stuff fits in my wheelhouse of stuff I love doing. And this game offers that in a very grounded way. You're not playing superheroes. You're not playing, you know, magic wielders or whatnot. You are just playing people. And it is in a similar way to why I love Traveller, is it takes what is a exotic and alien, in the sense of like unknown and foreign to you, setting, but grounds it through the lens of us, people that are not substantially different from you or I. Human beings put in a situation where they have to deal with these extraordinary circumstances, and we see what happens to them over time, and we become further invested in their stories by virtue of seeing them go through this from this very human perspective. I absolutely love that. And I think the same thing that I love about, and I should say Traveller, not all of them are human, right? We got a Vargur on the crew, there's an Aslan guest, and there's a robot cyborg person who is on the ship as well. So so that, all that's to say, like, it feels like Twilight 2000, more so than any of the other games that I ran this year. I came at the end of that session and I was like, God, I want to see what happens next. Because I don't know, you know, like I didn't, and we say that as game masters too about most of the games, right? But in a lot of games, if it is a traditional type of role-playing game and not a full story game kind of thing, you're going to have an idea of at least what's happening next session because you're going to prep for it. What's exciting about Twilight 2000 is not fucking knowing, you know, of not knowing what the players are going to do. Are they going to keep moving? Are they going to lay down? Are going to, you know, is some other random event going to happen? And all of that is in the context of just people. They are facing these challenges with no more special abilities or magical abilities or psionic abilities than any one of us has. They are subject to the same frailties of injury and sickness and despair. And all of that stuff, to me, makes for it's not going to be a game that everybody would want to play, obviously. There's a lot of things about that would not appeal to a lot of people, I imagine. But for the right group with the right game master, I think, my goodness, what a game. Like, what a campaign you could have to look back on. So that's a lot to look back on. So those are games we finished this year. Let me quickly talk about what we have for our charity sessions coming this year, and then I will talk about the games that I have on my to-do. So let me put this back up here while I'm talking about this. So charity games this year. These are the games we are getting to the story, and I don't have any visual aids for this. Coming this year, we have a session of Kevin Crawford's Godbound, the game where players are playing. It's an old school revival game where the characters play the inheritors of divine power from dead gods, and it's about how those heroes interact with and change their world. Going to be a really fun session. We have a two-part Dragon Age role-playing game adventure. We have a session of The Walking Dead, so similar to Twilight 2000, closer to Twilight 2000 in as far as the Year Zero engine is concerned than the Forbidden Lands or Aliens or things like that. We have a session of the Cypher system. I haven't run Cypher on the channel in about 3 or 4 years, but we have a session of We Are All Mad Here coming up. We have a session of Shadowrun 6th edition, which I cannot wait to run. I love Shadowrun. I have yet to get 6th edition to the table, so I'm looking forward to that. We have Barbarians of Lemuria coming up, which will be same author as Crimson Blades. So I'm looking forward to getting that to the table. And that one will be returning to our setting, I should say, of Thule, the setting that we used for our Astonishing Swordsmen and Sorcerers of Hyperborea. We have War Stories, which is a Year Zero game set during, or the immediate aftermath of the landing on Normandy. So it'll be a World War II game. No magic, no supernatural, no horror stuff, just soldiers dealing with, so Saving Private Ryan, the RPG, or Band of Brothers, the RPG, depending on which way you want to think of it. We have GURPS, NASA Punk Nightmare, a very near future horror, hard sci-fi thing. Well, hard except for the horror stuff. And Lex Arcana, that is a game published by the same people who make Brancalonia, and also some of the designers behind the One Ring. It is set in the Roman Empire, and it is a kind of like supernatural X-Files type thing, but set in the era of the Roman Republic. And then we have one more that has yet to be determined. The player has yet to tell me what their selection for that is going to be. So those are games that the players have selected for this coming year. And let me finish this up here. We're already at 2.5 hours, so running for the average. We're actually getting better time than I thought. I'll go through these 5, then I'll go to chat, and we'll see if there is anything else anyone wants me to address before we wrap up our year in review. All right, so these are games, I don't want to set them as like, I am absolutely going to run this hell or high water, because obviously things change and sensibilities change and whatnot, but I really have tried to think about, in light of a couple of the white whales that I have landed last year, what are some games that I truly want to get to the table, that I don't have players asking me to run, that I don't have, they're not seeing necessarily exposure in other, someone else is running it, or there's some neat new source book that came out for it. They're just games that I keep coming back to that I really want to give a go to. So here are these 5. I picked only 5. First one is Renegade Press. Is that what it is? Renegade Game Studios Werewolf the Apocalypse 5th edition. Now, it's referred to as 5th edition because their version of Vampire that they currently publish is 5th edition, and they have a hunter that is based on the same kind of game mechanics. This book, I had modest expectations for what was going to come from this, because I like I haven't run the Vampire or Hunter versions. I like them a lot. I like the books a lot. I like reading them, at least. I haven't run them, and I've heard some people who have not liked them and some people who have loved them, but this, to me, my goodness, I don't think it is necessarily the replacement for the storyteller system. If you genuinely do not like the storyteller system and it is an impediment to you playing a Werewolf the Apocalypse game, this is an extraordinary option for you for that. There are some changes to the lore that were made to reflect, the fact that cultural sensitivities have changed over the last 30 years. This does not have the photo stuff that you see in some of the early Vampire 5th edition stuff. It has nothing but illustrations, and some fucking amazing illustrations, including an amazing callback those of you who are long-term vampire or werewolf fans will remember the page-by-page fight between two werewolves that dominated the first edition and then came back in the 20th anniversary edition. They have that in here. It's super fucking cool. They have mechanics. Here's the reason this appeals to me over the other. I feel like I can have players master the mechanics in this after a single session. If we have a 3 or 4 hour session, they will know everything they need to know in order to run the game. I feel it will run at a much faster pace than what some of the others did, than what I found World of Darkness, Werewolf the Apocalypse, or Storyteller System, World of Darkness. Storyteller System, Werewolf the Apocalypse did. But still have all the cool shit from that. It has the Umbra. It has the it has the Umbra. It has the what else is in it? The gifts for the different characters. It incorporates rights in a better way. Rage is a much more manageable kind of thing. There's less narrative mana currency to keep track of. Building the character is a lot more streamlined. They've eschewed, and this is true of all these 5th edition books, this eschewed the need to have 5 dots in every single advantage and, thing. Some only make sense to have 3, so they've only got 3, and some need 5 to spread out over the course of it. You can pick up the book and get playing immediately because they have nearly full-built sample werewolves right at the back. They have some fun game mechanics that are random encounter type stuff in the storyteller screen and in the book too, which is great. One of the things I loved in Vampire 5th was the thing of random victims. And I'm sure they might have had that in one of the previous books as well too, but that's the first edition where there is alignment with different types of blood. So having a random victim with different types of blood that may or may not align with your needs is super fucking cool. So this game, I think, in light of how easy it is to get to the table, in light of how much they've kept the core of what I loved about the game, but offer you tons of ways of getting that type of story of, when will you rage? A lot faster with this game than you would with the other ones. So I really, really love this. I really want to run this year. Next up is a returning one. Now, I did get a chance to run Mage the Ascension 20th Anniversary Edition this year with John. I have my special edition that I absolutely treasure with me. I say treasure because the print version of it you can get through Drive-Thru-RPG is such a big book, the fucking binding falls apart. So I love that I've got one that I can keep reading and keep flipping through and whatnot. Mage is a game that has been my favorite of the storyteller games for years and years and years. I've talked about it at length, at nauseum, some might say, about on the podcast and different times in these kind of reviews. I finally got a chance to run it, and it was such a fun session. John was playing a pre-gen character, but he jumped in and made it his own. And the mage setting is one of those things where it's a combination of not only me wanting to have the players explore that setting, because I like the idea of this tension and the spirit haunted world with a tension between massive forces that are bigger than what you can, you're individually can handle. This, I wouldn't want to be running a game that is about the Ascension War necessarily. I would want that tension between the different factions in the game. For those who aren't familiar with Mage, I should say, I've talked about it so many times in so many of these videos. It is a game where you play a character who is has the ability, by virtue of circumstance or pacts or birth or whatever, or fate, but to have the ability to influence your version and your vision of reality on reality itself. And the game, there are game mechanics that sort of guide what you can and cannot do with that scale of of power, depending on what kind of character you build, and you can gain more power over time. But at the end of the day, the idea is that the world as it is exists the way it is because of consensual belief, because enough people believe that it works that way. And that can be on the global scale or on the micro scale. And what the original game was kind of about is how the spreading of the monoculture as it was seen in the 90s across the globe would result in a singular belief of what can and cannot be done. The persistence and the influence of religion on our modern world in the 20 or whatever years or 30 years since has shown that like a singular belief is not in the supremacy of technology and the enlightenment that would be offered by technology obviously is the reality we live in now is very different than what was foreseen with that. But it remains a thing that I find a fascinating idea for a game, and also in practice. With some of the more recent stuff that's come out, there's a book called Victorian Age Mage that came out that makes some changes to the core setting, not only, with in sense of the timeline, it also sets up the contest between the different adversaries as a lot more pivotal and a lot less of a certain thing. It also makes it a little more hopeful because what world might come from that period is different, and it also gives some really good ideas for how to change how magic works in it. One of the struggles I've always had with the game is figuring out how you're going to tell what mages, apart from like what's listed on the character sheet, what cool shit can they do given time, and what stuff is simply beyond their capability. And rather than, I've always sort of struggled with trying to figure out a way of compiling a list or something like that. And after our session with John, I just don't think that's necessary. I think if you have players who are in the spirit of mage, in the sense of like the fiction will inform what their characters are capable and not capable of attempting, and the dice will tell us whether they succeed or not. I feel like I am equipped now to take that next step and start putting an actual either one shot or short campaign together, and whether I'm playing with doing pre-gens so that players don't have to get to learn this setting that I've spent years continually going back to, or or working with players to come up with what characters they would like to see, at the table. However that proceeds, I'm gonna get Mage back to the table this year. I really want to spend more time in that world with those characters and with and see if I can find something, if I can find what has always been in my mind, what this game could be, which is just an experience unlike any other RPG, in the sense that you're not only dealing with larger scale, forces than what you could ever conceive of clashing with one another, the individuals that are part of that clashing with one another, each of which has their own, interests and whatnot, plus all the other factors and forces that make up this spirit-filled world that you occupy, whether they are mages or not. And I just think that the putting together a bunch of characters whose belief in themselves and reality are so strong they can actually change it, how can that not end up in a fascinating series of sessions and stories? So that is number 3, or number 2. Is that number 2? That's number 2. Number 3, we're going away from the storyteller system and back to Dungeons and Dragons. So I got a chance to run D&D 3.5. So these are my special edition ones that I picked up afterwards. I'm so happy to have these. One of the things that I realized over this past year having gone back to 3.5 and run it, not only rewatching our Barrow Maze sessions that we played with 3.5, which in my mind were our best Barrow Maze games. I think the marriage of setting and system with that was just perfect for what Barrow Maze is trying to be, and to fit our sensibilities for what we want from characters. You know, the ability to customize characters, the ability to have henchmen that develop and grow without them just being player characters, you know, built with the NPC classes from 3.5. All of that was in my mind when we played a 2-part session where I got to scratch another another bucket list item, scratch that off the list, using a cerebrolith in an adventure, a psychic demon from the D&D 3.5 expanded psionics handbook. My relationship with this game was such that because the game developed during the time of the explosion of the internet and the availability of kind of common thinking and consensus understanding of games, this is one of those games, and the Pathfinder 2 first edition was also an inheritor of this. This is one of those games that reached a point where there was sort of a accepted, I'm going to talk about it more when I get to my 3.5 review, because yes, that is coming this year. I don't know. I still need to explore more of the game line to feel like I can talk extemporaneously about it for 4 hours. But that is continuing to be something I'm working towards, to have a companion to my 4th edition review and my 2nd edition review to do 3rd and 3.5. I found that there was what some have called instrumentalist play. And there's a terrific video by Dan Olson, who has a channel called Folding Ideas. The video is called Why It's Rude to Suck at Warcraft. And it's a very long exploration of the idea of instrumentalist play as opposed to free play. And what those very briefly mean: free play is you do whatever the fuck you want and play a game, engage with a pastime and however you choose to engage with it. But what instrumentalist play is, it imposes a set of guidelines on top of the play that suggests what is the correct way to play. And I think, from my experience, 3.5 and 3rd edition fell into that instrumentalist play, where there was a clearly dictated right and wrong way to play the game. The wrong way to play the game was to introduce house rules or change things about the game or make use of stuff that were optional. That changed a bit with the release of Unearthed Arcana, I'll acknowledge, but that doesn't change that a lot of the early websites about D&D are these things where they're maximizing and ranking classes for optimization and comparing how many skill points you get from one and telling you why, don't ever play this is how ignorant I am of these things, because they made me so angry at the time. Why you would never play a paladin as opposed to playing a whatever the fuck, whatever the other optimized play is, and why certain races were optimized or sub-optimized. And the video on Warcraft was very helpful for me thinking about it, because it was parallel with that in many ways, where what you would go from playing World of Warcraft just to fucking bomb around and get in adventures and whatnot, but then if you got into a guild or if you got into raiding or whatnot, there was a right way of playing. And similarly, D&D had that too, and maybe it was because of group play, right? That with there was always sort of formalized play with the RPGA. But with 3.5, that gave you a way of thinking about your character and theory crafting your character in a way that the previous editions did not, which allowed others to check your math, as it were, and tell you whether you came to the right conclusion. And again, the determination of the right or the wrong conclusion came from that instrumentalist type of approach. Or an instrumentalist. I've already started changing different terms from my academic days. In any event, I'm going to be more prepped. This is why I need to finish more prep for it. But the long and the short of it is that got me thinking about what was accepted style of play and how much that had affected my thought on D&D. So I recently, after I completed filled out my collection for 3.5, I started going through the rules and started reading them from the perspective as if I was reading it like it was any other role-playing game I was going to play, where all that excess stuff that adds on an assumed style of play and an assumed value of certain decisions and whatnot, throw all that shit out with it and think of it how I would use this game to run the game I want. And it was helpful to, with the Barrowmaze game, strip it down to just the 3 core rule books. With our most recent game, I started expanding beyond that with some additional stuff from some other things, and I used some helpful. One of the advantages of having it be such a prominent internet, age game, I could find a lot of good stuff from designers about how they would tweak stuff. The game line, in particular, by the end of the lifespan of the 3.5 game, they started going into some pretty interesting and exotic idea or areas for game design, some of which didn't balance well against early stuff. Or against stuff that was introduced at least earlier. But you can find great advice online for, like, now what we know, here's what I would do with the Hexblade, or here's what I would do with the Duskblade, or here's what I would do with the Sword Sage, or whatever. Things that you would do to make certain characters work better, or to augment their to make them at parity, if that's of interest to you. But for those ones that have been deemed as just like utter suck by the tiered ranking websites out there, there's some great advice for making it a more competitive and interesting character to play. And the other thing is, and this is a lesson I learned from another game I'm going to talk about, but throwing out the whole precious point build stuff with it and just going whole hog on powerful characters, letting them have big stats on all their stuff, not like 18 and everything, but like give them a more than I would have ever thought reasonable. So for point generation, so they can have 18s and 16s and 14s and a lot of things. Setting aside whatever other consequences it would have, it also means that they're probably going to have a lot more skill points, which some of the characters I find they were always starved with. So with that in mind, I started thinking about the game running 3.5 the way I would want to run it, the way I like running games, to allow players to play more powerful characters, to think about how to approach things like XP. Because one of the things I loved about the Barrowmaze game was seeing the players getting directly rewarded for challenging things from the XP system. Things that were ultimately really challenging for them, they saw reward for by way of XP. And I liked how there was a default set of rules for almost anything that we needed to figure out. I love that I can figure out what, the encounter range. When would I first spot someone on the plains? I've got rules for that. When would I first spot them in a cave? I've got rules for that too. I've got rules to simulate a lot of the things that I find that I liked about GURPS, for instance, the simulationist stuff. Fighting in cramped quarters, for instance, is great because it, if you've got a character who is designed around a greatsword or a polearm or whatnot, you better have a contingency plan in mind. And one of the ways to avoid the punishing aspect of that when you have a singular focused character, if you build a character who's optimized around a certain type of encounter, it probably means, if you're doing point generation, that you've sacrificed other areas, right? What this allows you to do is, with the higher stats, is be a lot less punished by that hyper specialization when that stuff can't come into play, and the game itself, I remember now why I loved running this game at one point. Prepping for those 2 sessions we played this year, where I think we played 8th level characters. It was 7th or 8th level characters. Maybe they were 6th. And the only ones we saw at the table so far were a 6th level, or either 6th or 7th or 8th level paladin and a archivist from the Heroes of Horror supplement. But I built 4 other characters as well that we might be using this year in something. And if not, I really don't care if we make use of further 3.5. If we want to, that's great for war story stuff for our Night Below campaign using 3.5, because that's what those 2 adventures were. But I find that I'm enjoying this game again in a way I haven't since I picked up my original. I chose to use the slipcase edition cover here because that was my 3.5. I have carried that around with me everywhere I've moved, and while it sat on the shelf for a number of years, it felt so fucking good to come back to an edition that I have run probably more 2nd edition AD&D than anything else, followed by probably either 4th edition or 3.5, and then 3rd. I've run a lot of all 3 of those, but that's probably the way. I ran a lot of 3.5 back in the day. It was my go-to game for a long time until I just kind of got fed up with the Splat books coming out when I was broke, and a lot of the Splat books had more powerful shit, and it was annoying me that players were using stuff that I felt was broken and I couldn't respond to. Also, actually, that's not really the case. I didn't have a regular group during that time, and the whole theory crafting thing about optimizing a character, starting your campaign off at level 1 and having players who had already mapped out precisely how they're going to build their characters to level 20 just irritated the shit out of me, because how do you not feel robbed when you're not gaining levels faster, because you're always thinking of the hero you're gonna be rather than what's going on in the game right now? And that's a stupid way of, like, whatever people, it's a stupid way of thinking about it. People enjoy these games in different ways, and if they happen to enjoy that, then what the hell is wrong with me? Let them enjoy them in that way. It's not in fact impacting my fun whatsoever. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to running more 3.5, and I will say, unless I'm running a sandbox game, because I don't know what I would like to do with it, whether it would be a sandbox type thing like what our Baramaze game was, or because I picked up a couple of mega dungeons that would be fun to use for that recently, and or whether it would be like a story-based game. If I am going to run a story-based thing like our Night Below game or like some of our other campaigns, what I think I would do is I would just award a flat 1,000 XP per session, with the expectation that each session that you get that, and then we will see steady regular growth for the first few months of the campaign, and then we'll see things slow down while still giving players an opportunity to still advance. When I'd fit this in the calendar, I have no earthly idea. I'd honestly be satisfied running a couple of sessions or having it as a pickup game. I just know that I had a lot of fun returning to 3.5 and trying to run it in a way free of those restrictions that I had imposed on it myself that were drawn from the instrumentalist, correct kind of style of play. So that's being said, next one up is Ars Magica 3rd edition. This has been on many of my lists for games that I want to get to the table. It is a white whale of mine that has lasted for a very long time. I've waffled between using 5th edition and 3rd edition for it. I've struggled trying to figure out what I want to do with it, whether it's going to be a one-shot or an ongoing campaign or whatever. Because ongoing campaign, this, like Traveler, has many default assumptions built into the game that would make for really fun character or player decision making collectively with a campaign. But what I've landed on is an idea for a short adventure that will give me a sense of what the game would be like as a long-term thing. So a singular story with a single magus, a bunch of companions, and some other characters. I realized too that I think you can adapt it otherwise for 5th edition, but 5th edition Ars Magica, which is the current version, incidentally, it leans so heavily into the medievalist kind of stuff, which I get because it's a medieval game. I think I want something a bit more exotic. I find reading this stuff. There's some interesting historical tidbits in it, but none of it really gets, none of it really gets my imagination, salivating at the possibilities of what we can do. Ars Magica 3rd has links to the World of Darkness thing, and it's probably a good chunk of the nostalgia value of this, because this was my first version of Ars Magica. But Ars Magica, for me, the reason I like this one as well over the other is it has a very interesting and nuanced combat system. It has two different types of a quick and dirty kind of combat system, and then it has a more involved dueling combat system. And for the characters who are not mages, that to me sounds really fucking cool. I really like the system itself. Is very simple. I've started working on a character sheet to kind of make it easier for players to understand what they're using. And rather than having to go through the explanation of like, this is the setting, and here's the history, and here's what matters, and here's what I've changed and whatnot, I'm going to try and write a one-shot that is a clear adventure. The players will learn the sort of sensibilities of my version of mythic Europe, and what the Order of Hermes, their place is in that, and what types of characters you can play in it. I'm hoping to make it something that'll fit the sensibilities, not only that I would love to see more of, but fits the sensibilities of what a lot of the players enjoy. And it'll definitely lean more into a dark fantasy horror kind of vibe, which is hardly a shock, I'm sure, for anyone who's a regular viewer of this channel. But I really want to get this one to the table. This has been a white whale, I mean, for 30 years for me at least. What year was this published? My goodness. And for a game that I've never got to the table, that remains something I really feel like I need to correct that oversight this year. I don't have it listed here. I don't know what the publication information is not easily accessible, but anyway, that's it. One challenge with this one is that it is not. It is in drive-through RPG, and actually it's pretty cheap to get in print as well, and it's pretty plentiful. At the time this came out was late 80s, early 90s, kind of the boom of White Wolf, where they were putting out just an ungodly amount of splat books and stuff. So printing a ton of copies of this was not a bad thing. They're much easier to come by than some other games. And the last one I will say, if you're not familiar, with Ars Magica, what I'll just say is that it is a game that is set in a mythic version of Europe, where every player and the narrator or storyteller, I think in this version, everyone has a character who is a mage and a character who is a companion. And then every adventure is one of those mages going out from their chantry, from their shared, base, and accompanied by the companions of the other players. And you go and you have your adventure. It lasts a season, and then you come back. And the next season, a different mage goes out, and in the interim, mages do things like study, or create magic items, or create familiars or whatnot, or build up the chantry. And the campaign is designed to see the transition of this base of operations of your characters as the wizards age every year that goes by, and the companions age as every year goes by, and new people are brought in, and the chantries themselves go through a series of transitions that are loosely metaphorically aligned with the different seasons. Not chantries, they're called covenants, I think. A spring covenant, a summer covenant, a fall, a winter, a spring one being very new with young mages and little experience, new in their region. And the summer one is maturing. Fall is kind of the ideal period. They've come into their glory. And winter is as they are diminishing. They may rebirth once again into spring with the influx of new characters and new mages, but they may also die off. And then in addition to those main characters, you have a shared pool of grogs, which are like NPCs that you control, that all the players can take control of. No one owns them per se. So Great game. That is obviously that is a great setup for a campaign, but I think even on a individual session play, I've got an idea that will allow for a really fun story that will let us explore that world. Last one on my to-do is something we barely played this year, G.I. Joe. G.I. Joe is published by the same studio, Renegade Game Studios, same people who published the Werewolf game and currently publish Vampire and Werewolf or Vampire and Hunter and My Little Pony and Mighty Morphin Power Rangers and Transformers. This game uses a system called the Essence system that is a 20 level based system as well, and we only played at first level. So I've been thinking about what to, since the original core book came out, we only had, at the time this came out, the GM screen and one adventure to go on. And the core book, unfortunately, did not have rules for building adversaries. So I was a little bit left on to fend for myself for how to figure out what adversaries would look like. And then the Field Guide to Action and Adventure came out, which is a source book for the G.I. Joe, Power Rangers, and Transformers book. It's equally useful for any one of those. So if you don't happen to own, I own the Transformers one, but only the core book, and I don't own the Mighty Morphin one, I still find this an extremely valuable book. The fact that it happens to reference a couple other games, it doesn't matter. It gives you some amazing advice on building adversaries, on structuring your campaigns, on how to run the game. It also has, like the Pathfinder Game Mastery Guides, it has some subsystems, some neat ideas for running like chases or other kind of skill-focused non-combat things in G.I. Joe. And the Cobra sourcebook came out in this time, which gave more options for characters, more options in a nefarious kind of way, and a ton of new stats for adversaries. So with that in mind, and the more I kept thinking about, we only played at first level, the more I keep thinking I'd like to go back. But what I've been thinking of as a session for this year is not G.I. Joe. It's G.I. John, because I built as a kind of proof of concept thing, I built John Wick as a character in it, and started thinking about other modern day action heroes. So rather than trying to capture like the cartoon or, some of the lighter comics of G.I. Joe, I've kept thinking about like, well, what would, not the modern G.I. Joe films per se, but what would a G.I. Joe action military espionage kind of thing, a special action type thing, could I use these rules to do that? And having built a couple of characters based on more modern action heroes like John Wick, like Lorraine, I think it's Lorraine Bracco from Atomic Blonde, like what's his name's character, Chris Hemsworth's character from Extraction, like what's his name, Michael B. Jordan's character from that. It's not a terrible film, but he was in a kind of a military espionage, guns and spies thing. That was it was not a terrible film. It was released on Amazon as a really kind of under the radar kind of thing. But I built his character as it, and the rules. Once you get to, these were built as either 5th or 6th level characters. Or once you get beyond that first level, like a lot of these level-based games, you're starting to see characters come together in a really interesting way, and the game mechanics are much more suited to those level of character play. So it's a lesson. I don't know why I keep needing to relearn it, but hopefully I will remember it going forward. It's a 2024 resolution. Don't forget that level-based games do not show you everything at first, second, or third level. So the G.I. Joe game itself, if you're not familiar, it uses a D20, but there's a couple of really interesting ideas that go on with it. For one, the gameplay has 4 stats instead of the 6 that are typical for D&D, and each point you have in those stats reflects a point in one of the related skills from that stat. So skills are measured kind of like Savage Worlds in dice sizes, going from D2 to D4. I think it's D2 to D4, D6, D8, D whatever. And what you do when you're doing task resolution is you roll a D20 plus whatever your skill size is. But if you're specialized in whatever you're doing, so like John would be specialized in pistols, and let's say John's got a D8 in guns or whatever, I can't remember, I think it's called targeting is the skill. If he's got specialty in it, then when he makes his task roll, he gets to roll a D8 and a D6 and a D4 and a D2 and pick the highest of those, or whichever one he wants, as the actual as the one to add to the D20 roll. There's also opportunities to roll more than one, or to bump up or bump down your dice size. There's also re-rolls that come up, and you have a narrative meta currency that I can't remember. I want to say karma, that you can spend to have act as if you have specialty for one round. So if you really need to make something succeed, you can do that. The criticals in the game work that if you roll the highest on your skill dice and you succeed, you count as a critical hit. You have what are effectively hit points in the game as well, but I'm trying to remember how that works. I don't remember offhand, but I remember it feeling cinematic and pretty fast-paced once you've got some levels with your character. You also get a chance to pick whatever class or profession you belong to will grant you certain abilities. You'll also have a backstory based on some of your influences, which are kind of like themes in D&D 5. And you will be able to select feats as you hit certain tiers that might even allow you to like dip into another profession's abilities. And each of your, just like in D&D, you have an archetype that you pick with your profession. So there's an enormous amount of opportunity to customize your character. It isn't overwhelming with what you're learning, and because of the way the dice work, higher level characters are not automatically going to be better, because you can always roll shitty on any skill dice, right? So specialization will mitigate against that, obviously, as it should be for some of the more powerful adversaries, but it allows you to have a narrower range. So it's not quite the, like, you know, utterly different world that characters occupy between a 5th level character and a 15th level character, for instance. I wasn't crazy when I ran it with how I thought the rules were as written for vehicle combat, but then we got some really fucking cool chase rules out of that source book I mentioned. So I think you could run a really solid, someone had mentioned they used G.I. Joe for Spycraft on one of our videos, and that's a great idea. Or maybe it was on Discord, and that's a great idea. Like Spycraft in this kind of more crunchy spy game, extraordinarily crunchy. To be honest, I looked at it this year, and I built a John Wick on that, and like, my God, was that a challenging one to build. And would be a challenging one to play just because of a lot of moving parts in that game. I think Outgunned would do a great job of it as well. A new game that's coming out in the new year in print. But this would be a fucking cool action hero, kind of team of action heroes, a league of extraordinary shooty gentlemen and women and non-binaries. Would be an amazing fucking game to run, and I think that the game system really would support that kind of stuff. The way that they handle specializing gear in it is so fucking cool, because you can add on customization for your different characters and your different gear. So if you want the big ass, you know, if you want to incorporate, let's say, even some of the stuff from like the Fast and Furious franchise, that kind of questionable scientific reality near future stuff, you can absolutely incorporate that stuff in it and have a game like that using this game, I think. So I want to do something that is more John Wickified, because I have yet to run a game that feels... I think Feng Shui does a really good job of kind of that like Hong Kong or Matrix influenced action, but I think this could do a really good job of it as well. And I would... I think the character... I don't know. I think I'd prefer this to Feng Shui. just because of, you know, my own personal preferences for game mechanics. So those are 5 games that I just want to really gun. I've not had anyone clamoring to get them to the table. I'm going to talk about a couple of other things. I mentioned that there were 5 games I picked as I need to get back to the table this year, and I mentioned that there was one more that muscled its way on. And I think that anyone who knows the answer to what is best in life will know what game I'm talking about, because that is, of course, Conan, the role-playing game. Now, I have run Conan Adventures in an Age Undreamed Of, published by Modifius, a 2D20-based game for a number of years on the channel. It's one of my favorites. I love many aspects of the game, and I've had some phenomenal sessions that felt extremely appropriate to Conan on it. But there are a couple of things about the 2D20 system that have always bugged me, and it's similar to something that bugged me about the Fantasy Flight versions of Star Wars and Genesis. And I mention those in the same breath because Jay Little, the designer of the core mechanic in the FFG Star Wars games, he also designed the 2D20 system. And I don't mean to pick on him. He has made games that have given me some of the very best, or at least had a strong influence on games that have given me some of the very best sessions I've ever had in my life with them. So do not take this as being a takedown of his design. But the thing is, with those 2 games, with how fun and exciting that the pace of play is with Fantasy Flight Star Wars, with the 2D20 games in general, the time where I find that bogs down is when you are using the mid-range adversaries. I've talked about this on the channel before, and this is just a personal preference for the pacing of things, but I have never had those mid-level adversaries come in, the ones that aren't quite bosses, but they're bigger than minions, where at its core, the game becomes not at its core, it just becomes a matter of fucking attrition, of trying to wear down the hit points of the other adversary. That, for a boss encounter, God, take them down before they take us out, that is cool. Minions going down and having a whole bunch of them that can be a threat, love that, whether they're stormtroopers or they are Setite, cultists or whatever. That's awesome. In those games where you have to think through so much stuff for every round of combat, whether it's rolling the dice and interpreting the dice and deciding what you're doing with momentum or your advantage or threat, God forbid you roll despairs or triumphs against chump minions or those mid-range characters, you're not taking them down in one round or whatnot. It's attrition. It's trying to take them down before they weather down your hit points, whatever the equivalent is. And that, that's a core part of a lot of like every D&D game. Some of it is attrition. But the problem is with these ones is every round per round, I find, takes longer though. So I have always had that issue with that mid-range stuff. I also I've never run it long enough, so this could be a fictitious problem. But I don't know how to run like the XP on these characters. I feel like in Fantasy Flight Star Wars, I ran that for a long time, and we saw characters into the 200s of XP for it. So the characters were maybe even more. I don't remember offhand, but the characters outpaced the game mechanics. I felt they got to a point where they were too powerful for the game mechanics, and I feel like that could be the case. And there are ways to juke the numbers in Conan in particular, because it is a cheaper momentum buy for getting, and Doom buy for getting extra characters. I also find the Doom mechanic is a bit of a, and it's a threat in other versions of the 2D20 games. It is a mixed bag. It can be really, really good, and it can be just an impediment to having a satisfying pace of a session. So those are the concerns. Again, I still love those games. I still love the other 2D20 games as well. It is just something that I just don't include those kinds of things. Ditto for Fantasy Flight Star Wars. I'm just mindful of where I feel the errors are. Anna's saying hi again. Or not the errors, but the shortcomings that I feel there are in the game for what I want out of the play experience. And then I ran this. So this is a game I first purchased when it came out. I loved the idea of it. I loved the D&D 3.5 at the time. And it is based on 3rd or 3.5, and it changes certain things about it to make it more more of a Conan pulp, Howardian kind of experience. For one, you have classes are obviously very different in this. You also have a lot more skills. You get skill points from a bunch of different things. Your characters end up more skilled. One of the recommended ways of playing as well is take a D10, roll a D10, and add 8 to that for each of your stats. So your stats can be a lot more generous than what you get with a fate point build, and a lot less, bell curved at a 12 for 46 drop the lowest. You can do that as well, and there's a point buy system as well, but I love that the game just does not give a shit about balance. There's a lot of ways, a lot of combat maneuvers you can do in the game that make it really interesting. Free multi-classing across the different classes, and then as the game line developed, they started introducing unique combinations of the different classes to reflect that, like certain class combos for character concepts, there are abilities you will have that just you wouldn't need or it wouldn't be appropriate for it. So they give you options for subbing that stuff out. It's a product of the Splat book era, so it's not a surprise that it has those. But I will say that every one of the source books that they have put out for Conan First Edition, at least, it justifies its existence. There's tons of great stuff in each of them. The gameplay of this, I've long thought would be. For a long time, I thought, it's going to be absolutely. Ossified and very the way I remembered 3.5 in the very worst way, which was boring and whatever, and very mechanically focused and stationary because of attacks of opportunity. And then I had a really good session with 3.5 with Dave and George, and I went back to this and started thinking wait a minute, and I realized there are clear rules for fate points in this which feel extremely ahead of their time as far as spending a point to change something about the scene, about the story, or add an element about your character, I actually do speak this language that we need to know right now. Playing at the heroic tier in 3.5 had me go back to this. This is where I got the idea for just 1,000 per session, because they say with XP, they're if you want to have, there's no clear instructions for how to award XP in it, but they're look, if you can't figure out any other way to do it, just give 1,000 per session. And when you math that forward, that means looking at some of our current campaigns, Night Below characters would be 20th level, but they're 200 sessions in. Our Paradar characters at 48 sessions, that would be around level 8, which feels appropriate for where that campaign is right now. And I love the idea of just why wouldn't you just do that? Why wouldn't you just grant 1,000 per session? That means you're hitting level 2 after your first session. 2 more sessions, you're hitting level 3. Kevin Crawford's games have stumbled across this, and represent this as a way of playing by numbers of sessions. But it's cool to see this in a 2003 game, have that be the way of suggesting how to level up. We've only run one session of it so far, and it was a really good session with really good players. So, that might be influencing my assessment of it. But I love the Hyborian world. I love the idea of Conan. I love that style of play. And if I can have something that I feel there aren't going to be these types of adversaries that run contrary, or at least result in a pacing that I feel is contrary to every other part of the game, where I can have every adversary be as tough or as weak as the game will make it, and I can make the characters feel like they're playing badass Hyborian characters. And the combat maneuvers is one of the ways where they really make that work in this. The combat maneuvers are basically optional, kind of, for those who may remember 3.5 or are familiar with Pathfinder or whatnot, the kinds of fighting offensively, fighting defensively, a lot of the stuff that players can always do. Well, they also add in things that have certain either skill or feat requirements, and if you meet them, then you can do them. Some of my favorites that we've seen, or I've read about, or that we've seen at the table, include things like To the Hilt. if you were using a slashing or piercing weapon, you can use a to the hilt maneuver, and if you have the power attack feat, I think, and plunge your weapon into an adversary, and if the dice you roll for damage, not the total damage, just the dice number comes up that is higher than your strength bonus, that weapon gets stuck in your adversary. And then every action they take 1d4 damage until they take a full round to pull it out. So like the idea of facing some massive creature, right, where you're plunging these daggers and whatnot into it and letting it try and bleed out as you're trying to keep yourself around, that's fucking cool. Or plunging a sword into your adversary and accidentally leaving it in there, and either yanking it out yourself with a strength action next turn or having to pick up another weapon. The idea of human shield, where if you're grappling a target, you can literally use them as a shield to try and parry, because you decide when someone attacks you whether you dodge or parry the attack, if that's if both are available. And if you successfully parry with your human shield, they take the damage from the hit instead of you, and that just feels exceptionally Conan to me. In the same way that like the steely gaze or whatever it is from Conan 2D20 feels very Conan and very appropriate to the setting material. Anything that allows the players to feel like the characters from fiction, in my mind, like that's what I want from my licensed games, and this one seems to do such a good job, and there is so much to it. It also handles sorcery in a way that I feel is true to the source material, but appropriate for a game, because I found sorcery to be a colossal pain in the ass in the Mongoose stuff, because of the way that you can abuse or not abuse is my pejorative way of saying it, because the way you can use momentum for sorcery in that. Yeah, sorcerers are supposed to be very powerful in Conan, but it's bonkers that you can see them be so abusive, like so out of scale for what other characters are capable of in that game. I just found that sorcerers were they didn't feel like, for a game, that they fit a balance for it, and I feel like this does a great job of balancing what it is to be a sorcerer in the Hyborian world, the costs associated with that, the power that comes with that, but in the context of an actual game where other people are playing, and giving you a meaningful way. I absolutely love how sorcerers, I haven't seen them at the table, so maybe I'm wrong about this, but having built some pre-gens with it, I feel like this has a clear idea of, for me, is a better way of having it at the table. And that's maybe my own limitations as a GM. I know a lot of people have really enjoyed players in particular have enjoyed the sorcery rules from Conan. So, this is seeing it only from one side of the screen maybe, but I really enjoyed this game, and I really, really want to get it back to the table this year. We always run a Conan game at some point. We've done that every year for, 8 years or however long the channel's been around. I really want to see more of Conan this year. It was such a great game to prep for, to run, to write for. I love writing for the Hyborian setting. So there's that. And that will be satisfying also one of the things that we always do on the channel, which is run a Conan game. One of these, I'm telling you, Anna's reminding me, but Kev, what about Star Wars? Well, don't worry. What I did, this year we ran Star Wars Savage Worlds as part of our annual kind of May the 4th, excursion from our Night Below campaign. And the year previous to that, I had cobbled together some rules using the 2D20 system to run a Star Wars mini campaign. Largely based on Act on Cthulhu 2D20, which I also really love running. I should say as well, as much as I'm saying, I don't want to make it sound like I'm suggesting that the Conan game, the 2D20 game, or any of those, or Act on Cthulhu, are bad games by any stretch of the imagination. As I said, some of my favorite individual sessions have been with those games or with Fantasy Flight Star Wars. It's just that I have a holistic perspective, I think, on those games, the things that I love, and its warts, or at least what I view as its warts. We're going to run Star Wars again, and I asked our players what of the various versions of Star Wars that we have run, official, non-official, or whatnot, what have been your favorites? And the overwhelming favorite was Fantasy Flight Star Wars along with some very strong votes for Saga Edition Star Wars. And I love both of these. I love, honestly, the only one and I love the Savage Worlds one too. The Savage Worlds Star Wars that we ran this year was a really great system too. Star Wars Saga, I have a renewed appreciation for in light of how I've been feeling about Starfinder and 3.5 for sure, but also, I love me some Star Wars. And the Fantasy Flight games, in part because I was looking again at Genesis, the game that it's based on, because of it's not based on that. The core mechanic behind those 3 Star Wars role-playing games is what became the generic role-playing game Genesis. And I was reading Genesis in connection with a recent source book for it. But, I don't know if it's we had a lot of fun with Star Wars this past year. I know what the players' preferences are for Star Wars now, too. So we're going to get Star Wars back to the table. It sounds like it's probably going to be Fantasy Flight, but I would not be surprised if we saw both of these over the course of the year. Because there are different group people in different campaigns who have enjoyed that. And it might be fun to do a May the 4th event with more people, than just the Night Below campaign. And I actually don't know whether... I don't know what we're doing with our war stories this year. We have committed to at least 6 months of Night Below into the first, using 5th edition for the first part of this year. So we'll see what happens after, after June. But I don't know. I mean, we committed. I say that, but it's not like we've signed a document or contract or something. So who knows? Who knows? What I will say is that both of these, I think, will give a really great experience. Both have pretty good Roll20 sheets, which is always a determining factor for me. And I think both give a really great Star Wars experience in a very different way. I think the Saga Edition gives a more predictable outcome, and I think that I don't experience the same kind of lag, I guess, with those mid-range adversaries. Not lag. I feel it's at odds with all the rest of the system. All the rest of the system tells you that every single round matters because of the outcome of any individual dice roll in any of these Star Wars games. It really can change things for the dramatic. But when you're having to slog through them every round, through attrition, Star Wars Saga plays a lot faster. But the Force users are a little more wahoo than they are in the Fantasy Flight Star Wars games, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a thing. And Star Wars Saga also has the benefit of the phenomenal skill challenge rules that were written for Galaxy of Intrigue. So there's some really great... what I think is that both games represent a complete expression of one way of doing a role-playing game set in the galaxy far, far away. I don't feel there is any missing or gaps in any of these games. You might say that, well, we haven't seen the sequels. We didn't see anything from them apart from a kind of shitty starter set for Force Awakens. That's fair enough, but I think that with these 3 games and with the supplements that were put out for the Fantasy Flight games, you have everything you could need to run a Star Wars story anywhere using any of the time periods that are recognized in that official universe. And for Saga Edition, it's the same thing, only the only limitation being it is a product of its time, which means before any of the Disney acquisition stuff came out. So you're not going to see, some of the canon stuff that's listed in there is going to be out of canon now. Although they're folding so much shit back in that who knows? Thrawn's back in now, so I guess you can use your stats for Thrawn from Saga, even though it was written for the Timothy Zahn series. But anyway, so those are the 2 games. I'm not going to go into great length with about either of those. I think they are both very strong versions of the Star Wars role-playing game, and it really comes down to what you like. I will say that the Fantasy Flight game, just to give a little bit of, because I was shitting on the way the adversaries work, the way the outcomes you can get in those dice mechanics are unlike anything else I've seen in any other role-playing game as far as the variety of different results, and it feels extraordinarily Star Wars at the table. That can get tedious as the dice pools get bigger and it gets a lot more swingy, but the sessions using, especially my first couple of sessions, using the starter set for Edge of the Empire are some of my favorite all-time sessions, and it has made lifetime fans of that game from at least 3 different gaming groups that I've played with. So it's a fantastic, it has a very strong mechanical idea of what it is, and that is both good and bad. You know, not everyone likes strong flavors one way or the other. The last thing, after 3.5 hours, what I'm going to talk about. We learned this year. So there was a source book that came out for from Matt Colville's publishing called Flea Mortals. It's a really great monster book that borrows a lot of ideas from 4th edition and incorporates them in kind of a 5th edition context, but also makes some changes. I love it. I think it's a terrific source book with some really good ideas in it. I don't agree with all of them, and not all of them are new. There's a lot that are just, it's 4th edition ideas that are repackaged. There's a lot of stuff that, there's a lot of games, modern games, that I think get lauded for innovations in things that are effectively like what was introduced in Saga Star Wars or introduced in 4th edition. And I'm salty only because those two, I think, those two games get pretty shitty reactions from some corners of the internet that is extremely undeserved. At least the level of vitriol. I had to delete a comment from some, and I blocked the fucker because someone commented on one of our actual play sessions about how 4th edition is trash. And it's just like, for a brief moment, I'm like, what? Why are you fucking watching this? Why are you commenting on an actual play, a session 3 of an actual play? Like, why the fuck did you come on here? And clearly someone who also then said that they didn't really play it. So it's like, so not only are you an asshole, you are an ignorant asshole with an abundance of free time. So those are your 3 strikes, my friend. You are gone from our channel. But one of the downsides, or the kind of corollaries from that, is that because people don't necessarily expressly reference 4E, like Pathfinder 2, which owes a lot of design ideas to 4th edition, there's some people who just aren't aware of what those innovations and what those things were. And we were talking to one of our players who we assumed had played in one of our previous 4th edition, excursions, and I was like, oh, but this is like in this in 4th edition. It's like this in 4th edition. And he's like, man, I haven't played 4th edition, so I don't know. And we're like, oh man, so we had thought that he had played in it before. So the decision was made that evening to hit 2 birds with 1 stone sometime this year. One of those is to introduce this player to 4th edition because we think we'd like it. I mean, not because like he needs to play it or needs to be whatever else. It's a game, again, not a game I'd use to run everything, but I've had a lot of fucking fun with 4th edition, and there's some things that it does better than any other version of D&D, in particular with really fun tempoed fights. So that's one thing, is to introduce him to it. And the second thing is to return to one of our collective favorites on the channel, Dark Sun. So some point this year, we're going to be running a short adventure using the 4th edition version of Dark Sun. I have also fortunately been provided, I cannot remember the name of the person who wrote them, but there is a very generous creator out there who used to run the RPGA stuff for Wizards, and they were the ones responsible for writing this campaign for Dark Sun in that is held in extremely high esteem. Like, takes all the best lessons from 4th edition and puts them out in one solid campaign set in Dark Sun. And it turns out if you email this person, they will send them to you. It takes some time. Like, it took a month or 2 before I finally got a response, and I'd forgotten about it. But then I got these emails, and he sends you all the adventures, all the pre-gens, all the maps, all the, like, everything you need to run these things, as well as the unique kind of like faction-based reputation stuff they used for it. So it's like standing at the very apex of the design of 4th edition before they abandoned it and started developing D&D Next. Using all the best things learned from 4th edition, how best to write skill challenges, how to make use of themes in the game, all those things, how to make for fun and balanced encounters with bosses, with individuals, all the variety of fights you see. So we've got that. We're not going to play the full campaign. We're going to play the first adventure with that, with Dark Sun. So we're going to get 4th edition D&D back to the channel. I know we have some folks who are regular subscribers and not just random idiots from the internet who join on to shit talk a session that they're watching. But we're going to be getting this back, and I'm really looking forward to that. It's again, 4th edition, I don't think I would want to run it as an ongoing game at any point, but it's always there's some things that there are some things I've learned from running that game that have carried forward with me. There are some sessions I've had with 4th edition well before we had a channel that are some of my favorites of all time, and it remains, I think, still some of the absolute most fun combat that you can have with D&D. It's so fun because it's designed to work that way. But in any event, that is the final thing. That is all of the different games that I wanted to talk about, and that is the year that was 2023 and what we have planned for 2024. Let me go to chat and have a quick sip here and see if I have anyone who wishes to hear anything else. Oh, you know, I realized too. Oh, no, it shows everything here. Good. And Happy New Year to everybody in chat as well too. Thanks so much for joining us here. Let's see. No, just some good comments. Thanks, Berserk Ben. I'm wearing my sweater, my mom's knit sweater again for today because it's the final day of my holiday. So my holiday sweater, saying its last appearance on the channel. So very comfy. Oh, and thanks, THX. Yeah, that was. I'm glad to hear that you enjoyed the Conan session. Oh, that's great. Mean Gene, thanks very much. I'm glad to hear that you enjoyed our Conan games, and good luck with Modifius Star Wars, Star Trek. I'm going to be Trek is on the agenda for this year as well too. I've got a Klingon one shot that was going to be one of the charity sessions or one of the sessions requested by the players, but they changed it to, they teamed up to make a 2-part Dragon Age thing. So I've got a Klingon one shot that's probably going to be played this year. And yeah, old Uncle Mojo, I completely agree about Saga doing spaceship combat. I really like spaceship combat in Saga Star Wars. I think it's really good. It definitely requires some knowledge on the part of the players, and I think that Starfinder improved on it to let more people play in that sandbox than just pilot focused characters. But I completely agree. We've had some. We've only had like 2 dogfights, I think, with it so far, but we did one with George where he was playing his character Pash. No, not Pash. What's his character's name? Oh God, how can I not remember his character? Kiro Starskimmer. That was an enormous amount of fun. It was him being chased by some I can't remember what they were. The Kanji Club characters, and it was a really tense and exciting spaceship combat thing. That is awesome. Oh my God, Mean Gene, thank you so much. That is very generous. And I will say, as a reminder too, anything that comes in, that goes inevitably to the players. So that is very generous. Thank you very much, Mean Gene. That's extraordinarily generous for you. And what else here? Dark Sun, very cool. Yeah. They were fun. They took you out of the D&D, AD&D world viewing. Yeah, and so that's one of the reasons I think, THX, you commented about how the fourth edition version kind of took you out of the setting. One of the things we're going to do this year is rather than doing a war story with it, we're going to genuinely let people play different characters in a different setting rather than, I mean, people may fall into old habits, and play characters that are similar to theirs, but it's going to be a Dark Sun setting. Dark Sun's also a setting we love, right? Like we played, that's something I forgot to talk about too. This year, for the first time in a long time, like 6 years maybe, we didn't have a gaming marathon because I was just so busy at work, and then when I finally got a break to get free, I went back home. We did, I think that the 6-part campaign kind of filled the niche that did, and we didn't have a singular holiday game over the break either, but that honestly, there wasn't a single game like Blackbirds was last year. But our charity campaign, the Year of Your Omens, did a really good job, I think, of giving a big campaign that a lot of our players got a chance to play in. We're going to try for a gaming marathon again this year, but it's tricky when it comes around time with so many player chosen charity sessions and other kind of pickup games and whatnot. It's sometimes tricky to find that weekend to justify just spending that many times playing that game. It doesn't feel as necessarily as special either when we also have other weekends where we're regularly playing, like one game Friday night, one game Saturday morning, one game on Saturday afternoon. That felt I don't know, like I've got 6 months to figure that out, but I don't know if we're going to reinstitute that as a thing. We'll have to see. I mean, one of the things that was really fun about the gaming marathons is an opportunity to play something we typically didn't play, an opportunity for some people to play together who don't play together in regular adventures. So I don't know. We'll have to see about that as well. But yeah, the Dark Sun, I think, will be a really fun. It'll be a really fun game, and it'll be a good pairing of setting and system. C&C, Castles and Crusades, did an extraordinarily good job of giving us a Dark Sun style setting, but I think that will also be a really great one too. I think it'll be different from it, definitely in the sense that the psychic powers will feel different at the table, but I'm not so precious. I have adapted Dark Sun into I don't know how many different games. Iron Kingdoms, I wrote my own game for it at one point, which was not a very good game. But in any event, that will bring us to the close for today. So that is the year that was 2023. My thoughts on some of the games that we played, my thoughts on some of the games that I loved from this game and why, and some ideas for what we're going to be planning for the coming year. Again, a huge thank you to everybody. Mean Gene, your generosity is staggering. Thank you very, very much for that. That was very unnecessary, but I really appreciate it, and we will put that to good use for more good games on the channel. So yeah, that's it. We're going to have in a couple of our campaigns more kind of chatty sessions with the players in the coming years. But I hope that last thing I'll say is everybody who has joined us for any of our games for however long on the channel, thank you so much for joining us in 2023. I don't get a chance to look at the chat as much when I'm running games, but I know that the players do, and they love interacting with the folks in chat. There are regular folks we see in there all the time, and you get a chance to interact with the players more often than you do with me through that. So I just know that they do really enjoy that aspect of the gameplay as well. In particular, reminders of class abilities sometimes is helpful with some players, so that is really really great. Yeah, thank you so much for subscribing. Thank you so much for sharing such kind comments about the games and the players. And again, any comments that come in like that, I make sure to share them with the players as well. I hope that you all have a wonderful start to 2024, that it brings nothing but great stuff for you, or at the very least manageable things, and we look forward to seeing you back at the table again in the coming months. So as is always the case, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns regarding any of the stuff we talked about today, please don't hesitate to leave a comment in the comment section down below, and I'll endeavor to reply in a timely fashion. There's also a link down below to the Dungeon Musings Discord server, where all of us are active. active. Not only myself, but everyone else on the player roster, as well as many of the commenters in chat and in the comments below. We also have a link down below to our friends at Noble Knight Games. Again, all the games I talked about today, there are links to their publishers or where you can get them in down below. So if you want to find out more information about any of these, you can find that information there. Otherwise, we'll be back on Wednesday with our first session of Night Below. We will be doing our year in review, but I think since we left that on one heck of a cliffhanger, it would be a disservice to the players to not dive right in. And also, I think one of the players might be in the wrong time zone right now for that, so we're going to want to give him an opportunity to come back before we have our, annual retrospective with Night Below. But that's what we'll be back doing. Me trying to kill a bunch of characters in 5e with some terrible undead. But until then, I hope that I've given you a couple of hours to take your mind off the troubles of our world and think about the year that was 2023, the fun we had on the channel and at the table, and some of the plans we have for the coming year. But until we see you again, stay safe, stay healthy, happy gaming, and Happy New Year.